Hi everyone, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to see you join me. And don't forget to like, and let me know what you think in the comments. When I was 10 years old, my brother came home to die on a frigid day in January. Purple lesions ravaged the skin that barely covered his bones. He looked an awful lot like a skeleton, unlike the friendly visitor I had come to know over my short lifetime. My brother Tobias was many years older than me, so I didn't have much of a relationship with him. Still, he made a point to take the train home to New Haven for the holidays, filling our living room with plenty of gifts. One evening, he bought Mom the Fendi baguette she always wanted to show off to her friends at the Junior Women's Club. For my dad's gift, he purchased a George Foreman grill, and all his coworkers at the office buzzed about it. For me, he bought a creepy crawler's oven with liquid and mold containers. The last time he came home, I was excited to show him all the bugs and monsters I made. You better not. My mom said solemnly when I came home from school one day. My arms were filled with the new batch of miniature reptiles and amphibians I had created. They were a big hit at recess, and I knew Tobias would love them. He's super tired, honey. I thought they would cheer Toby up. She shook her head and sobbed, drawing a handkerchief to her face. Honey, we talked about this. Toby is very sick. He won't be able to hear you now. My mom sobbed loudly as my dad slung an arm around her, directing her down the hallway. Devin, your grandparents are in the living room. Why don't you join them? These words caused my mom to weep even louder for some reason as my dad ushered her away. As they reached the living room, I heard the faint words of the Lev in hospice nurse that it wouldn't be long now, and something about hearing the death rattle. When the sobs faded and the conversation died down, I turned the knob to his room as quietly as I could. Standing in the doorway, my heart fluttered. My brother not only looked like a skeleton with his frail exterior and dissolving skin, but like one of the gray aliens I made in my creepy crawlers oven a couple of weeks ago. Unlike the alien, however, he had several tubes attached to him that were hooked up to boxy, beeping machines. His body looked so thin that I swear it started to fade into the sheets of his bed. Toby, I said hoarsely. I waited a few minutes before I shouted his name. Toby. Minutes passed before his purple lips quivered and let out an audible groan that dragged on for several seconds. After the groan ended, 6 booming words escaped his lips. Look for me on the walls. A longer groan ensued these words, followed by a long beep from the machine. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as the nurse, my parents, and grandparents rushed into the room. I don't remember much except for shuffling feet, screams, and my father whisking me out of the room and closing the door in my face. The adults were in the room for several minutes before my grandmother finally left with her head cast down. She threw her doughy arms around me and said, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Your brother's gone to heaven with the angels." As the other adults came out of the room one by one to hug me, apologize, and sob into my small body, I wondered if I should be crying too. I supposed I loved my brother, but I didn't know him well. To me, he was just that friendly visitor who bought me gifts and read me stories. He popped in and out of my life like some magical elf that appeared only for holidays and disappeared like Santa up the chimney or Frosty the Snowman on a sunny day. I put my hands over my eyes and pretended to cry with them. After a while, I asked if it was okay to go up to my room. My parents permitted me. At once, I hurried up the stairs and slammed the door behind me. For hours, I plopped onto my dinosaur bed sheets and stared at the walls. I stared at the walls for so long that I thought my eyes would bleed. The walls of my room were sponge painted blue, covered in posters of my favorite baseball players and movies. The shapes on my walls were unmoving. As my eyes drew tears and I yawned, I started to drift off to sleep. My room didn't have any windows, so I couldn't tell whether it was nighttime or not. But I suppose night was nearing by the increasing shadows in the room. Something was strange about these shadows, though. They weren't the typical black or gray, but shades of green. I blinked as green circles danced around my walls like a stage spotlight. "Are you awake, Debbie boy?" a hollow voice echoed. "It's time to wake up, Debbie boy." "Who?" I said, rubbing my eyes. Who are you?" "You know who's silly. I don't have much time." I blinked twice and the green circles faded together. All at once, the circles morphed into the shape of a human. The shape looked a little under 6 feet tall, perhaps taller, its figure reaching the brim of the ceiling. Toby, is that you? Who else, Devi boy? The figure let out a bellowing laugh and stretched atop the ceiling, twisting around the fan in almost a rhythmic pattern. But I thought you were dead. The figure unleashed another bellowing laugh, this time twisting onto the carpeted floor, its green glow matching the soda I spilled the previous day. I thought I would die too, Devi boy, but it's the most unusual thing. You don't go to heaven or hell like we learned in church. Don't tell Mom and Dad, though, especially not Grandma. I won't, I said, scratching my head. But Toby, if you're not dead, what are you? Hiding. The figure's voice changed from a bellowing pitch to a dull whisper. What do you mean? You must swear not to tell anyone. I swear, Toby. I swear. People don't die, the figure whispered, draining from the carpets back to a small circle on my wall. Thee hide. From what? I don't know yet, the figure said, its voice now trembling. I just know that we're hiding. We're all hiding. As the figure spoke these words, I saw dozens of green circles bouncing around my walls. They were varying shades of green. Some spoke in whispers like my brother. Others spoke in gibberish that sounded like different languages. I shoved my thumbs into my ear canals as the sounds grew louder and more varied. I jammed, my eyelids shut as the lights flickered and burned into my retinas. As I screamed, I heard my brother's voice once more. People don't die, Debbie. They hide. And they must never be found. I screamed so loud that my cat Jasper hollered from the other room. I screamed so loud that my mom, dad, grandparents, and even the live-in nurse hurried upstairs and forced their way into my room. It's okay, honey, my mom said, pulling me into her bosom. It's okay, sweetheart. We're all so sad. As the others crowded around me, I continued to scream. Though the sounds had disappeared, I still heard my brother's voice loud and clear. People don't die, they hide. As the days faded into weeks and months, I saw the green circles everywhere, bouncing about the side of buildings, circling the screens of the downtown movie theater, and even on the fence of my backyard. Sometimes the circles morphed into the shapes of humans. Other times they looked like mere reflections. One time during a sleepover, I swore I even saw the circles morph into the shapes of falling bats on the outsides of my tent. I tried not to scream when I saw them. After a while, I tried not to look. When I didn't look, however, I heard their whispers, which usually amounted to nothing but gibberish. As the months faded into years, I checked myself into therapy. The only chance I had to stop seeing the circles, to stop hearing the awful, muffled voices. As a college student, my campus therapist surmised that the shapes and whispers were my way of coping with loss and grief. He assured me that people truly did die, and even took me to the local morgue, which his cousin owned, to show me what a corpse looked like. I admitted that I had never seen my brother's corpse when he died. Seeing the corpses of an old woman and a man as skinny as my brother made me realize how natural death was a part of life. I kept in touch with my therapist after college, and with each passing day, I began to hear the voices even less. For the first time in forever, I could appreciate the sounds of the outdoors that I had taken for granted, even the menial ones like a gust of wind or a child screaming on the playground. For the first time in forever, I could appreciate the laughter of Julia, the girl I took on a first date at the local Starbucks. I loved the sound of her laughter, the sounds of our laughter, as we engaged in the silliest conversations. Throughout my life, I heard many wonderful sounds like church bells on my wedding day or the sound of my son Jack crying in my arms. I fell in love with the lights and sounds of my life until the day I started to cough profusely. My wife had taken Jack to daycare as I sat in my home office, typing a draft of my latest article. I felt the urge to cough, a large, bulging urge rising from my chest. As much as I tried to ignore it, I finally unleashed the cough, a cough so powerful that I doubled over onto my desk, spilling blood onto the keyboard. I began to shiver as the blood dripped from my mouth onto the keys and all over the floor. I scrambled to find my cell phone and dial 911 as I continued to convulse blood and cry. After I had emptied all of the contents of blood from my stomach, I collapsed onto the floor with the receiver by my ear. 911, what's your emergency? Hello. With what little strength I had left, I pushed my body across the floor to the phone. I threw up a lot of blood, I said weakly. I'm sorry about that, sir, the dispatcher said. Many moments passed before she spoke again. Hello. Are you there? Sir, the dispatcher said, her voice suddenly a lot lower and more muffled. You better start thinking about a good place to hide. As the voice began to cackle, a swarm of green circles danced around my body. I would like to start this blog by introducing myself. My name is Christopher Short. I was a teenager and an avid gamer in the early 2000s, and while I did own a PS2 and an N64 before that, I mostly played games on my PC. Games such as Doom, Half-Life, Quake. Now these games were huge, but I was also intrigued by smaller releases that almost nobody else knew about. Back then, services like Steam and itch.io weren't available yet, and internet connections were quite slow. This meant that smaller developers, especially games made by just one guy, didn't really have the option of uploading their games for all to play, and instead they had to resort to handing out physical copies that you could order on their website or selling them in person either through themselves or a third party. A more well-known example of this is Funny Pizza Land, which was originally released in 2002, but only got attention 10 years later when it was uploaded to itch.io. This made a lot of games extremely rare. One such game that I had in my possession was called Pharaoh's Crypt. Pharaoh's Crypt was a game that combined the point and click adventure genre, dungeon crawlers, and adventure games all set within a 3D environment that moved in real time. It was also seemingly being sold in extremely limited quantity in my local area. I said seemingly, simply because I know of only a few other copies of the game being sold from research I did later, as almost no one I got into contact with seemed to have known about the game. Almost nobody I knew personally, and not even on forums when I went to ask whether anyone else played the game, with only a few exceptions. I bought the game, which was burned onto a CD in a local video game store. The place was just local, it wasn't a big chain like GameStop or anything, so it made sense that they would sell something a bit more sketchy, alongside the other more mainstream releases. Something that I noted immediately as strange was that there was never any mention of who the developer was, nothing on the cover, nor the game itself. After I got the game, I didn't immediately get around to playing it as I was quite busy at the time. However, summer break was coming up, and that meant I would soon have the free time needed to play through this mysterious game. After the long and arduous final week, filled with exams and homework, I finally got home on Friday and had 8 weeks to do whatever I wanted. I had a few things in mind, such as spending time with my friends and family, my girlfriend, and going on a hiking trip with my buddies. However, another thing I had in mind was Pharaoh's Crypt, as I didn't really have anything left to do that day, and my peers were all tired and just wanted to get some rest. I decided I would finally get around to playing it. I prefer to play new games at night starting around 9 p.m. It just makes playing through it the first time different. At around 9 p.m. I started the game up for the first time. I got to the licensing agreement screen and proceeded to agree to everything without reading anything and downloaded the game. After a few minutes, the game was ready to go, and I launched it. The game started up and immediately showed me the main menu of the game. There were only 3 options: New Game, Continue, and Quit. Something that struck me as odd was the lack of a settings option. The game was full screen at all times, and there was no way to adjust the resolution or volume. The background showed an image of a pyramid at sunset, seemingly a photo from the real world, pixelated and ran through a filter that made the colors more muted and gritty. The title, Pharaoh's Crypt, along with an animation of sand floating through the air. The main menu music was also an ambient track, sounding similar to the music from Silent Hill, with some Egyptian flair added to it, such as a flute playing a somber and distant melody, a basic drum beat, and the sound of wind howling, carrying the sand along with it. By all means, I was intrigued by what this game was going to be. The game's greatest strength seemed to be its atmosphere, which pulled me right in even in the main menu. I clicked New Game and started my journey through the game. The intro cutscene of the game started, overlooking the pyramid from the menu. It then explained that the game took place somewhere between 1830 and 1845. You played as William, a British explorer, looking to uncover the secrets of a recently discovered pyramid found hundreds of miles southwest of Cairo. The pyramid was given the name Duat by the expeditioners who initially found the pyramid. For those unaware, the Duat is an underworld in Egyptian mythology where the deceased pass through various tests and environments in order to be judged. At the end of the Duat lies the Hall of Judgment. Here, their heart gets weighed against the feather of Mat. If their heart is lighter than the feather, then they gain access to the afterlife. If it is heavier than the feather, their heart is devoured by Amit, the devourer of souls. Amit is a part crocodile, part lion, and part hippo creature, basically an absolute freak of nature. The cutscene then cut to a 3D, first-person animated sequence of William walking up to the pyramid's entrance. It was a purely CGI cutscene, straight out of games you'd see in the 90s. Sure, it wasn't the most technically impressive game in the world, but all things considered, fairly professional for a studio which, for whatever reason, refused to credit themselves. They did a really good job of showcasing just how massive this pyramid was, a towering structure reflecting the sunset. The only reason a pyramid of this size wasn't discovered sooner was because of its extremely remote location within the Sahara. The top of the pyramid was, however, for whatever reason inverted, which I thought was a unique stylistic choice, something to make this pyramid stand out amongst the others. There were also 4 large, damaged statues of ancient Egyptian gods next to the entrance. Unfortunately, they were all decapitated, so I couldn't tell exactly which gods were being represented. The protagonist of the game made his way to the entrance, and when he finally reached it, lit his torch. It was impossible to see any more than a few feet in front of him. He descended a long, dark staircase. Hieroglyphics, such as scarabs and lotus flowers, lined the walls, and the sound of footsteps echoed all the more oppressively as William made his way to the first floor of the pyramid's interior. When he finally started to reach the bottom, a faint light began to emit from the bottom of the staircase. At the very bottom of the staircase, he finally reached the first floor, which was surprisingly completely illuminated by lit torches. They emitted a powerful, radiant, golden glow, and on the walls were paintings of gods. Of particular interest was a painting of a god with a falcon's head riding a flying boat, on top of more hieroglyphs. The room was also grand in scale, emphasizing a sense of power and grandeur. The music in this room was also more upbeat than the music in the main menu, while still being ambient, and the sound of shifting sand echoed faintly throughout the massive room. Now, I don't know much about Egyptian mythology, but it was obvious to me that this floor represented Ra, the god of the sun. There were also no obvious signs of danger, other than a pit of quicksand at the end of the room, on the other side of which was a set of large doors leading to what I presumed to be the next floor of the pyramid. There were also scarabs crawling along the walls. However, they didn't seem to pose any threat. Just like the intro cutscene, the entire game was in 3D with a first-person perspective. Pressing the He button on my keyboard opened up the inventory. My character had a Bowie knife, a few first aid kits, a torch, a journal to document his descent and map out the inside of the pyramid, and a health meter. On the left and right were 2 doors, each leading to smaller rooms which contained treasure, jewels, and gold, as well as puzzles that I would have to solve. They all involved themes of the sun, day and night, and light in some way. One puzzle involved shifting around mirrors, which reflected a central light source emitting from a large hieroglyph of an eye of Horus in order to guide it towards another eye. It was similar to a puzzle from Ocarina of Time's Spirit Temple, which, now that I think about it, is actually the closest comparison to this first floor. After a while, I found an item called the Book of the Dead. It went right into my inventory and was obviously important. However, none of the pages were readable as they were all hieroglyphics. And unfortunately, I cannot speak ancient Egyptian. As I made my way through the many rooms and halls of the first floor, I began to occasionally see things that looked somewhat out of place. Just a few unlit torches here and there, a scratch on a mural, rusted pieces of jewelry, and occasional subtle whispering. I presumed that these were all glimpses of darkness foreshadowing what was to come. Eventually, I reached a room containing a statue of Ra. Interacting with it deciphered a part of the Book of the Dead I was carrying, giving me a spell that made a powerful golden glow emit from the book. After a series of puzzles that made use of my newfound ability, I finally made it back to the main hall, and I had noticed something I hadn't before. It was an eye of Horus on the ceiling similar to those in the puzzle I had described earlier. Using my new light spell on it, it activated a bridge that let me cross the pit of quicksand, and through the doors that led to the floor's final room. It was yet again another grand, circular chamber with a sphere symbolizing the sun in the middle of it. Suddenly, a vision of Ra appeared above the sphere. He began to speak, and the dialogue box said, "Brave soul whom ventured here, wilt thou wield the sword of light with honor, or allow the darkness to consume thee?" Suddenly, a burning lion creature burst out of nowhere, snapped my torch in half, and revealed itself as the game's first boss fight and first real threat. I wasn't prepared for this confrontation, but eventually figured out how the game's limited combat system worked. That wasn't before the lion got me the first time, which played a pretty gruesome cutscene of my character being burned alive while being eaten at the same time by the lion. This also revealed my character had 9 lives initially, now down to 8. I thought this was a nice nod since cats were considered sacred in ancient Egypt. On my soon attempt, I figured out I had to find mirrors while circling around the room, where I needed to cast the light spell to temporarily blind the lion. It was actually yet again somewhat similar to Ocarina of Time's King Dodongo fight in terms of structure. After repeating this process a few times, I finally got close to the blinded lion, pulled out my knife, and interacted with him. This showed a brutal but also badass cutscene of my character stabbing the knife into the lower part of the lion's jaw and running the knife down, slicing clean across through the lion's throat and stomach, with all the grisly detail of blood and guts being visible. Damn. This definitely isn't going to be game for kids, I thought to myself. Then, Rai appeared again, congratulating me on passing his test, and also apologizing for putting me in danger while mentioning that all things considered, this still would have been a merciful death compared to what I would have succumbed to later. Thou art worthy, take this with you. I received a light-emitting amulet with a scarab engraving. May it provide light where darkness lurks. May it provide hope where there is suffering. May it remind you to never succumb to the darkness beneath. This item replaced the torch in my inventory, and the door to the next floor opened. William descended another long staircase, amulet in hand. This time around, however, the descent seemed to be more sinister. Cracks lined the walls in increasing frequency the further he traveled down the staircase, and the occasional faint whispering now became almost constant. After yet another long descent down another staircase, William finally reached the second floor of the pyramid. The light from the torches was now a lot dimmer in comparison to the first floor. The murals now depicted the underworld and its gods, such as Anubis rather than Ra, and the imagery of light and the sun was completely gone. The murals themselves also had a lot of scratches and showed signs of decay. The environment itself was a maze of dark, corroded, claustrophobic hallways, cells containing the skeletons of those who died within them, rusted chains, and various messages scribbled in blood and fecal matter, protected by iron bars lining each side of the various twisting hallways. This place was also a lot more hazardous than the first area, which was almost completely safe, as the hallways contained various spike traps, poison dart traps, and pits full of venomous snakes. The music now had a slow but tense rhythm. In the background, I could hear the occasional rustling of chains, the sounds of bones cracking, all while the faint whispering continued. It became apparent rather quickly that this place was a prison. The environment required me to use the new amulet as a light source, as natural light sources were quite scarce. A lot of the traps could also be disarmed with the knife in some way, if I managed to notice them before accidentally triggering them. There was, however, another more pressing matter. As I explored the area, I quickly became familiar with tall, dark figures who I will call the Wardens. These creatures stalked the hallways, and were obviously not happy about their duties being disrupted by William. You could not defeat them, however you could either hide from them, or use the light spell to blind them in order to give yourself an opening if they started pursuing you. The Wardens would also emit a heartbeat sound that helped you identify their current position, as well as being unnerving. Some cells contained the spirits of those who died within their confinement. Some of them would simply complain about their situation and not help out at all, while others were kind enough to help William by giving him tips on how to get past the area. Some spirits would even just scream and alert the wardens. One of the doomed spirits suggested that William should figure out where the easternmost part of the prison was and look for a place where he could insert the scarab amulet that Rye gave him. After dodging warden's spike traps, jumping over snake pits, and avoiding poison dart traps, I finally found a cell with a loose lock, which I entered. Inside the cell, there was a circular hole in the wall, seemingly matching the exact shape of the amulet I had, which I inserted. Nothing happened, so I waited, but still nothing happened. Eventually, I decided to take the amulet out, which caused the wall to crumble, revealing a hallway filled with strangely fresh bodies. Some of them even appeared to be burnt. At the end of the hallway was a tome. Approaching it and interacting with it deciphered another part of the Book of the Dead, this time granting him the ability to curse. William left the hallway and got out of the cell. A light now appeared to illuminate his path forward, which I thought was strange. The wardens also appeared gone now. This, however, made me even more uncomfortable, almost like the sudden calm was quickly going to spiral into a moment of panic. Then, all the cages in the prison behind me suddenly opened. Shit, I gasped out. The souls of the dead started to scream inhumanly and began chasing William. I quickly started moving William forward along the path of light, careful not to make a wrong turn, as that would mean the end of me. All the while, the music was now completely overshadowed by the sounds of screaming, rattling, and the cells opening. At the end of the path was a locked door. This game was really getting to me now. With no other option, I did the first thing that came to mind. I cast Curse. The souls suddenly all stopped in unison, and then screamed incredibly loud. I actually had to turn down the volume on my speakers manually. Makes sense, however. I guess getting cursed for all eternity does suck. Despite their attempt to kill me, I still felt bad about dooming them for all eternity, as if they weren't already screwed before, stuck in this forgotten prison somewhere impossibly far underground. The door to the next floor was also quite disturbing. It had dried blood and claw marks all over it, along with rusted chains and locks to secure them as tight as possible. That wouldn't matter, however, since the chains began to turn into sand and the doors opened. I braced myself for whatever might be behind those doors, expecting the worst. However, when I entered, I was met with what seemed like, well, it looked like a spa. The room was well lit, didn't have any signs of damage, and in the middle was a hot tub, for lack of a better word. It was a giant pool of hot water. Interacting with it, it healed some of the minor damage my character took from the traps in the prior section of the game. What the hell? I said to myself out loud, as I was not expecting something so welcoming. Then a figure, seemingly a woman, appeared from the light fog created by the hot water. She introduced herself as Aset, the goddess of healing and magic. She explained that this is in fact an Osis, a pocket dimension within the pyramid that helps those who seek out the Pharaoh's cryptic place to rest and recover. This essentially served as the game's checkpoint system. Any death from now on would return me to the last manual save I had made in the Osis. It had the same feeling as a Resident Evil save room, the only truly safe place in the entire game. Aset then told me that once I was ready, I could just go through the exit and continue my descent. I was expecting something to happen, something to go terribly wrong. This had to have been another fake out, right? Well, it wasn't. I still had my suspicions that maybe it would be corrupted later, however. Maybe on my next visit, as it will turn into a demon, and the hot water will be turned into lava. Now at this point it was getting quite late. However, it was a Friday, and I still wanted to see what the next floor of the game had to offer. So I went through the exit of the Osis, ready to see one more floor before I turned off the game. William descended the next staircase. What greeted him below was a lake within a large open cave. The music here was also fittingly more aquatic, but also a lot more ambient, with heavy reverb being utilized to convey the lake's size and depth. I needed to pull out my amulet just to get a light source here. It was obvious I needed to follow a set of wooden platforms floating on the lake in order to get to the other side. Below me, in the water, I could faintly see bodies of hundreds of people being held down by chains that they were attached to. They looked like naval mines, but instead of the bombs, it was corpses. I swear there was a faint, muffled whispering coming from the lake. Something large also appeared to be swimming in the lake, though I could never take a good look at it. More so, I just felt its presence throughout. I didn't want to stick around too much longer since I didn't want to get eaten by it and lose another life. The platforms would sway from side to side, and occasionally the creature would briefly surface. However, all I could ever see was a row of gigantic teeth. I eventually came across a wrecked ship stranded on a large rock, with massive scratch marks all over it and a significant level of decay. In order to enter it, I needed to solve a puzzle, and once I got in, I was quite relieved that nothing horrible awaited me in the ship's main hall. Surprisingly, it didn't seem like any water got into the ship itself, meaning that I was free to explore the entire ship. Some rooms were darker than others, and I could barely see even with the use of the amulet. The music here was quite quiet, and the only sound I heard for the most part were my footsteps and the creaking of the ship's floorboards, as well as what sounded like running, but it was always distant and always brief. As I made my way through the ship's many rooms, I discovered journal entries left by the sailors who met their end here. They started out hopeful enough, talking about how good the crew's morale seems to be and how they were excited to discover new territory. As the journal entries went on, they got more and more depressing. One sailor talked about how not everything is going to plan and how he misses his family. Another one talked about how they haven't seen land in too many days, and that they would have to find some soon as supplies weren't going to last much longer. The quality of the handwriting also started off good, but got progressively more shaky as the entries progressed. I eventually found a bedroom where I found the final journal entry. I'll let the final entry I found speak for itself. We don't know what to do anymore. We don't even know where exactly we are anymore. We don't know which way we are going. We have completely run out of supplies. There are no fish in the area, but there is this thing. I haven't seen it, but I swear I can hear it. I can feel it. I know it's watching. It's been watching us for days now. It will follow us everywhere. We can't go anywhere without being followed by it anymore. That thing must have eaten all the fish. It doesn't seem to mind the thunderstorm that has been raging for several days now either, but we sure as hell do. Or, I don't even know if it matters anymore. We nearly got capsized multiple times now. Sooner or later we will get capsized by a wave or crash into something. We don't know where we are. We have a hard time controlling the ship through the storm. Most people don't even seem to care anymore. We are starving. We are going to die here and get eaten by whatever that thing is. I feel so sorry for my family. They will never get closure, and I feel so bad for the captain's son, that poor boy. After I got done reading the final journal entry, I put away and was immediately scared by a skeletal, thin young boy with black eyes who just stood in the doorway leading out of the room I was currently in. He didn't make a noise or anything. The music actually stopped the moment he appeared on screen. Well, I guess I'll have a hard time sleeping tonight, I told myself in my head. After a few seconds, he just disappeared. This made me extremely uneasy. I needed to find a way out of the ship. I didn't know which was worse, being trapped with the ghost boy on the ship, or jumping across wooden platforms outside the ship, essentially walking on eggshells in an attempt to avoid that monster. I wasn't done with the ship segment of the game yet, however. It was similar to a survival horror level, where I needed to find keys and collect different items to progress. The presence of the ghost boy never left me either. However, I would only faintly glimpse his shadow from time to time. One puzzle involved in putting a sequence into a compass that corresponded with the path a ship on a map had to take, that I had to figure out using said map. The ship also had a nice level of detail with pieces of broken furniture, and plants alongside other signs that nature was slowly taking over, alongside imagery depicting crocodiles, and the figure of a man with a crocodile head. I eventually unlocked the top part of the ship, where I came across another tone, which explained a bit about the monster's origin. It was related to the crocodile god Sobek, a fierce and aggressive deity within Egyptian mythology, with the body of a man and the head of a crocodile. This explained the imagery that I found, that I mentioned seconds earlier. It also granted me yet another spell, this time resembling a sonar, device that I could use to track monsters, and in this case the thing in the water. After finding the exit out of the ship, I was met with a maze of wooden boards floating on the surface of the water. I didn't know exactly which way to. However, I felt safer in being able to cast the sonar spell, which I promptly did. It showed me that the monster was to my left, so I headed forward and alternated between going right and forward. This sense of security wouldn't last long, however, as the monster briefly disappeared off of my sonar before yet again reappearing, this time right in front of me. The beast flew out of the water, launching the wooden board several feet up into the air as it revealed its horrifying form. A zombified crocodile with rotten human limbs and skinned human faces grafted all over its head. I quickly turned to the right and got as far away from this thing as possible. However, I could also tell I was losing my way. The creature's roars went from bestial in nature to sounding like the screaming of men. The music here was also the most intense it has ever been so far. After what I would assume to be several minutes of just running away from it, barely avoiding it with the help of my sonar ability, I saw the ghost boy again. My first instinct was to run. However, for whatever reason, I approached him. I quickly realized that he was trying to guide me out of here to hopefully avoid the same fate that those sailors had. With the help of the ghost boy, I finally got to the other end of the lake. A bright light emanated from the next door. When I finally got to the shore, I decided to look behind me one more time to see what the ghost boy would do. On my sonar, I could still see the crocodile thing approaching. It jumped out of the lake, desperately trying one more maneuver to get me. The ghost boy, however, flew into the air, and a powerful fog obscured what happened next. However, I knew exactly what happened. The ghost boy, too, felt guilt for what happened, as well as hatred towards the beast that killed his crew. With my help, he was finally able to get rid of his guilt, as well as take his well-deserved vengeance on the beast. The most horrifying floor so far also had the most bittersweet ending thus far. I entered through the door, saved my game in the Oasis, and finally turned it off for today. I shut off my PC, messaged my girlfriend goodnight, exchanged a few more texts with her, and finally went to bed at around midnight. That night I had a nightmare about the game. I can't recall the exact details, but the environment was disgusting. Rotten meat, rusted industrial mechanisms, black, distorted symbols that just barely resembled hieroglyphs at this point lined the walls, the floors, the ceiling. They were all pulsating. They were all alive. By itself, it made me feel sick. It looked similar to something you would see in Silent Hill. But the problem was I felt like I was really there. Disturbing and distorted moaning and shuffling sounds overwhelmed my sense of hearing, and I was seeing eyes that, for whatever reason I knew, weren't actually there. For some reason, I just knew where I was. I was in the lowest floor of the pyramid. This nightmare was about the game. I traversed the claustrophobic hallways of this nightmare realm until I reached a crypt. This was at the Pharaoh's crypt, a tomb closely resembling that of Tutankhamun. Suddenly I couldn't move, and I felt a presence. This presence manifested into a tall, shadowy being who towered over me. I could not remember a single defining feature about it. However, I remembered what it said. "You are making great progress, Chris. I have to say I'm impressed. But remember, you can't turn back now. Just keep up the pace. Something great awaits you." After the mysterious figure said that, the grave began to open slowly. A feeling of unimaginable fear got more and more intense. As incoherent sounds got louder and louder, I felt a pressure in my head going from subtle to unbearable. The more the grave opened, slowly revealing its contents. But before I was able to see what was inside it, I woke up screaming at 4 a.m. My bed was completely drenched in sweat, and my heart was pounding. Needless to say, I didn't really want to go back to sleep anymore. I decided to listen to some music and watch YouTube for a few hours until I could begin my morning routine at a more reasonable time. I finally decided to get out of bed at just before 7 a.m. I felt quite groggy as I really only slept for around 4 hours. I was also happy my sudden yelling didn't wake up my parents. I saw no point in texting my girlfriend yet as I knew she probably wouldn't be awake yet to see it. And I wanted to at least wait another hour before I did. In the meantime, I decided to take a shower, do some basic hygiene, and make myself breakfast. A pretty normal morning considering the rough nightmare that I had, but I generally do not let those get to me, even if this one felt quite intense. It's not the imagery that bothered me per se, it was literally just the feeling that felt so intense. It's the kind of extreme fear that only a nightmare can induce. No horror game or piece of media could even come close to it. I thought about what I would today since I still had a lot of time on my hands. I decided to go for a morning jog. Nothing too intense, just something to wake me up properly and also keep me fit. I eventually got around to arranging plans with my girlfriend, as well as my buddies. My girlfriend was already busy today. She had some homework that she had yet to turn in and wanted to do it all today rather than later, so she apologized and told me we could meet tomorrow on Sunday, which was great timing as we decided to go on a hiking trip with my friends on Monday. We would spend 2 nights out in the wilderness. This meant that I needed to pack a lot of things, which I decided to do in the afternoon as I would probably not want to bother with it while my girlfriend is around. I had not forgotten about the game, of course. It wasn't really my priority. After a long day of just generally wasting time and finally enjoying my freedom, the evening rolled around yet again, and I was deciding what I should play. Pharaoh's Crypt was always an option. I had almost completely brushed off the nightmare by this point, though when I initially started the game up again I was reminded of it, which sored me slightly on the game at that moment. I debated whether it would be a better idea to play something else like some Doom WADs I didn't play yet, but my intrigue got the better of me, and I braced myself for another session of Pharaoh's Crypt. When the game loaded up, I noticed a few slight changes. The main menu's background was now a bit darker. There was also a lack of music. I didn't think this was particularly odd. Some games have dynamic main menus that change as you progress through the game. When I hit the Continue option, the game started loading. On the loading screen was a messagey, "You can't turn back now." The game loaded and I was in the Oasis. But the truth is, I was completely frozen. My eyes fixated on the message that was no longer on my screen. My mind was stuck reading that message, still completely fresh on my mind. It freaked me out more than anything else the game has shown me thus far. This had to be some insane coincidence, I thought. After all, it seems like a message that would fit perfectly into a game like this. I tried to brush it off, but to be honest, I could never get rid of this sharp, paranoid feeling in the back of my mind for the rest of the session. After all, these were the exact words spoken to me in my nightmare. What are the odds of that? But other than a cosmically insane coincidence, I just had no other explanation. Brushing off my discomfort, I exited the Oasis to see what the game had in store for me next. The next floor initially appeared more comforting than the previous 2. It was something that actually resembled the inside of Pyramid, and while the amulet definitely helped, it wasn't a complete necessity as the floor was actually quite well lit. The area had a distinctly red-orange tint, conveying the dryness and heat of the place. The music also sounded like the first thing you would think of when you thought of Egypt pyramid music. The sounds of quicksand permeated that rooms and hallways, accompanied by the sound of pennies falling from holes in the ceilings and walls. The Egyptian symbolism was also back in full swing in this area, hieroglyphics and all. It was a non-threatening place, until I encountered the floor's main enemy. The main threat of the 4th floor were golden mummies. Thin, humanoid creatures seemingly being made out of gold, or rather, what was previously people. Now completely encased and trapped inside gold. They had no discernible facial features, just a flat, round surface of gold where their faces would be. And they also moved in an extremely unnatural and uncanny way. The sounds they made were extremely eerie moans and groans that sent a quick shiver down my spine whenever I heard them. They were also quite quiet, not making any obvious sounds, which made me lose a life to them. The death animation wasn't anything complex. One of the figures simply grabbed me by the head and stared at me while it made a hush sound before it cut to a game over screen, making my number of lives jump down to 7. In combination with their high polygon count within a low poly game, it was a really off-putting and eerie death screen. I figured out quite fast that the best way to deal with this new enemy was to use the sonar spell I got from the previous level. It wasn't unbalanced, however, as the range at which it could detect the golden mummies was quite short. Using the curse spell also appeared to be effective, slowing their movements to a sluggish pace for a few seconds. Progressing through the level, I made my way through the claustrophobic corridors and waterfalls of golden pennies. From the murals that were painted on the walls, I could slowly piece together a common theme of greed and abuse of power. Some murals had a figure sitting on a throne of gold with stacks of food, while below were rows of people reaching out, but nothing came to them. Another mural had the same kind of rich figure sitting a golden carriage, being carried by what was obviously slaves. The most interesting mural, however, was also the one that deciphered the origin of these golden mummies. It was a mural depicting a king being slowly turned into gold while the slaves and peasants cheered. Later on, I encountered a mural of people smashing the golden mummy with a pickaxe, taking the gold, and even ripping out still preserved chunks of flesh and meat that was hidden underneath the shell of gold. Towards the end of the level, I unlocked another spell, this time a stasis spell, which did exactly what the name implies. Once I got my new spell, a giant boulder crashed through the wall opposite of my position. Thinking quickly, I stopped it dead in its tracks with my new spell. This spell was also useful for the golden mummies, as instead of slowing them down, it completely froze them. I figured out later that I could freeze some of the falling pennies to reveal hidden pathways behind them. Some puzzles also forced me to use both the stasis spell in order to stop moving mirrors, and the light spell to reflect light off of them at the correct angle. The final challenge in this level was an encounter with a sentient, golden sphinx statue. It was obvious I needed to engage with it in order to open the way into the next floor. I expected this to be a boss battle, however it was more of an NPC interaction, with me needing to answer its riddles in order to progress. The riddles were just the usual, although some were a bit more interesting, such as the passage of time brings with evolution. Evolution makes what came before redundant, but what is the thing that your kind will never replace? For this riddle, I had to select an item from my inventory. In this case, it was the knife. It makes sense, I guess. The blade is something that won't become redundant anytime soon. Eventually, however, it asked May, what is the thing that haunts the pharaoh's crypt? I was a bit freaked out, but then I read the options, which were a giant snake, the pharaoh's ghost, and a tall dark figure. My jaw dropped. Despite all the signs, I still thought this was a coincidence. However, there was also no real way for me to know the answer unless I selected the third option, only to find out I was right. I had no explanation for this, but it still had to be some kind of coincidence. I mean, the game is pretty creepy. I don't have nightmares that often either, but it's not like it's some grand mystery. I had a nightmare about the game and that's it. Besides, these things are quite predictable. It's not uncommon for a horror game or a game with horror elements to feature a tall, dark figure. That could literally be anything, and I'm quite certain almost all horror games have that to some extent. Oh, and about the message, you can't turn back now. It has to be one of the first things you think of when you think about a horror story where you descend into a place further and further, so nothing out of the ordinary there either. I aggressively brushed it off and just continued with the game. This time, however, when I got out of the next OSIS checkpoint, I opened the door to what I assumed would be another staircase. It wasn't. Instead, it led me to a room that looked like a rusted jail cell, not like the ones in the Sun floor, but something that felt more modern. This didn't mean it was well kept in any way. It was disgusting, with rust covering the walls, the floor tiles were rotting, and what was obviously a light bulb had a horde of insects flying around it. It flickered on and off, and as it did so, I could hear it flickering. The music in this area was also quite disturbing. The main instrument was a horn which was heavily distorted, followed by what sounded like the scraping of metal or machinery with added distortion and reverb. In the center of this small room wasn't a staircase, but a hole with a bottom that I couldn't see. This was an uncomfortable thematic shift. Up until now, William has had the luxury of going down staircases he couldn't see the bottom of. But at least it wasn't a hole he couldn't see the bottom of. God knows how deep it would take him if he even survived the impact. Having no other option, I jumped down. The next floor had an industrial aesthetic. Everything had a dark red, almost brown tint. You could practically feel the decay just from looking at it. Stained light bulbs were the only source of light, and they were all locked behind cages or bars. The floor was also made of the same rotten tiles, and there were rusted pieces of industrial equipment and machines everywhere. Some of them even functioned, and the ones that did made extremely uncomfortable screeching sounds as they were all practically on their last legs and had thick layers of rust and decay. None of this even felt Egyptian in any way anymore, unless you want me to believe that the ancient Egyptians were an advanced civilization which used modern-day machinery to build the pyramids, and used light bulbs instead of candles and torches. All the while the music from before became even louder and more intense within this rusted maze. It was a maze-like environment, as I just mentioned. It also made clever use of the stasis mechanic that I got from the previous floor, with puzzles involving freezing cogs in place in order to stop pistons from crushing me, or in order to get past gap that was being blocked by a giant moving cog. This was by far the most dangerous level so far, with a variety of hazards and traps such as the aforementioned cogs, saws, as well as just falling debris or the floor crumbling right beneath my footsteps. I actually lost 2 lives just while exploring, which brought my overall number to 5. I had noticed something strange, however. Whenever I lost a life in the game, I could also feel something. When I lost my 7th life, I felt a tickling sensation around my ribs. But when I lost my 6th life, I also felt something. This time it was a small amount of pressure. But whatever, maybe I just forgot to breathe properly during my workout earlier. And this was the minor consequences of my actions. This new disgusting environment also called for a new, disturbing enemy type. The main enemy type for this level was a biomechanical abomination, a person, stitched together from multiple different corpses, held together by rusted machinery, and quite literally stitched together body parts, which were all infected where the individual stitches penetrated, and the stitches themselves were also rusted and decayed. This enemy had a bloody, rusted circular saw in place of where its right forearm should have been, and it let out a distorted scream that started off as just the voice of a man in pain, but near the end began to sound like the same screeching of machinery. There wasn't really any way to counter this enemy. No spells seemed to work. Sonar did detect them, but it felt quite unnecessary as they were quite loud, which gave off their position. The more I progressed through the level, the more death I saw. At first it was just the enemies, then the rooms began to contain decapitated limbs and other body parts. I had noticed eyes painted with blood on the rotten walls. They were still similar to the eyes of Horus, just a bit more distorted. Every once in a while I could also see a tall shadow creeping just around corners, but whatever it was always gone before I managed to take a look at it. Eventually there was even a puzzle I found in engine room where I had to unclog a pipe, and when I did so a mass of crushed flesh and bones spewed out of the now unclogged pipe. Solving this puzzle activated a drawbridge elsewhere in the level, which I could now cross to get to the final part of this floor. The final room had a boss fight against a large, incomprehensible entity made out of several corpses. The closest thing I could compare it to would be a frog or some kind of insect. It moved rather slowly but had a few abilities it could use, such as lunging at me or spewing acidic vomit. There was also no unique music. It was still the same horn and screeching that played through the entire rest of the level. In order to defeat it, I had to lure it into jumping into a meat grinder in the center of the room. As the meat grinder shred its bones and flesh, it didn't let out any scream, just soft howls of pain, while the sounds of rusted machinery breaking bones apart were far more apparent. The lack of desperation it had when it got shredded made me think it was almost glad to finally die, glad that it was getting put out of its misery. I was also glad not to lose a life to this boss, as it was one of the harder ones so far. I saved my game at the next Oasis, and decided to turn the game off for tonight. I was feeling quite tired for whatever reason, so I did my usual routine before bed before heading off to sleep once again. I felt quite happy that my girlfriend would be coming over to my place tomorrow, and that I would go hiking with my friends the day after that. As for my thoughts on the game, it was spooky, yeah. Definitely more so than I had expected at first, but I was still intrigued as to what the ending might be, and just how the next floors would look like. Needless to say, yesternight's nightmare wasn't bothering me at all anymore. Playing the game seems to have been a way for me to face my fears head on, and come out on the other side stronger. With that satisfaction, I turned off the lamp on my bedside table, texted my girlfriend goodnight and that I couldn't wait to see her, and went off to bed. That night, I had another nightmare. This time I woke up in a void, just pure darkness. The only sound I could hear was an ominous hum all around me. It was like being stuck in space. It remained like this for a while. However, I was beginning to feel increasingly uneasy. White paintings of eyes began floating in the void. They weren't painted on anything, they just floated. And they looked exactly like the ones I saw in the 5th level of the game. Then they all suddenly stopped. For a second there was silence. Then a static noise began to play as they began floating towards me. The static got louder and louder as they inched closer and closer towards me. But just as I could almost feel them touch me, everything went black again. I can't exactly tell if what happened next was part of the same nightmare, or another one I had later into the night, but I was suddenly dropped into a dark, red hallway. There were no sounds at first, so I started to walk down it. I remember I wasn't particularly scared or even slightly uneasy here. For whatever reason, I felt quite calm. I needed to make my way through a sort of red maze, until I heard something say, "Come here, Christopher." It was a very deep-sounding voice, and it echoed throughout the many halls. There was no doubt in my mind that it was the same voice that the tall, dark figure had in my previous nightmare. I was shaken up by this, but what other choice did I have other than to continue? I felt like my movements were almost dictated by something more than just my own willpower, allowing me to come closer despite the increasing fear that I felt. As I got closer to the source of the voice, I could hear torches burning faintly down the hallway, and once I got there, I was greeted by the same room from my previous nightmare. A golden tome lay before me in the center of the room, closed shut. The unease in the air became more apparent until the dark figure showed itself once more. "I'm so glad to see you are back." It said so in a friendly manner, although that didn't really do anything to stop the feelings of panic that I felt seeing it again. "You are so close now. Just 2 more floors left until you are at the bottom." Suddenly, I realized I was completely frozen in place. No amount of wishing that I could move my limbs helped the fact that I was trapped in my own mind with this thing. Also, it just became clear to me that the dream suddenly started being a lot more vivid. It didn't feel like a usual dream. It felt a lot more like I was actually there. It felt more like sleep paralysis, rather than the usual nightmare at this point. I was starting to get really paranoid about what would happen next. I was hoping maybe I'd start to hear some loud noise that would wake me up, but nothing like that happened. The nightmare wasn't over yet. The figure slowly approached me, but its footsteps barely made any sounds. As it was nearly right up in my face, it lifted me into the air and said, "We will see if it has all been worth it. You can't go back now, so no use in regretting what you have done. What's done is done. Now it is time for you to face your judgment." As it said this, it paused for a moment before asking me, "Were you ready?" It was funny in a way, since I couldn't even talk. The nervous laughter in my head was suddenly replaced with a feeling of confusion that quickly turned into panic as the strange pressure in my chest grew into a strong force that tore my chest and abdomen open. I was in agony. There was a hole in my chest, and my ribs also began to crack. I could see chunks of my ribs falling out before I could feel my heart tearing apart from my internal organs and arteries. The pain was excruciating, but I could still see the figure take my heart into its hand and slowly back away. It then summoned a golden weighing scale and placed a feather on one end of it, before it put my heart on the other. My vision blacked out right as my disconnected heart nearly touched the scale. I couldn't see anything, but I could faintly hear it say, "You are a good person, Chris. Take solace in that." I woke up in a sweat, breathing heavily, and at the same time as yesterday. I touched my chest and was glad that I still had all my body parts intact. I wasn't really thinking per se, more so just examining my surroundings and making sure I wasn't under any sort of threat, like a caveman or animal would probably do. Once I did all that, I simply lied down on my back and stared at the ceiling for a while. I mean, what else was I supposed to do? I guess the game was getting to me, but I wasn't sure why it was getting to me that badly. Simply thinking about the game now made me feel scared. Now you might say, well, duh, it's a horror game, but this wasn't that fun. type of fear you get from playing those. It wasn't the ominous feeling you'd get from reading a scary story or a movie of some kind either. It was a lot more instinctual, something more akin to a phobia. I was tired but also felt a lot more alert. The uncomfortable feeling just over my shoulder didn't leave me. I got out of bed and tried to do my usual morning routine, taking a shower, making myself breakfast, all of that. It was Sunday now, and I needed to make sure I got some proper rest, as well as spend quality time with my girlfriend once she came over. I couldn't, however, ignore the elephant in the room, which was Pharaoh's Crypt. This game was really getting to me, but it also intrigued me more than ever. So despite the obvious effect the game was having on my mental health, I thought that by playing it earlier in the day I could face my fears, as well as hopefully avoid another nightmare. I kept in mind that for 2 nights in a row now, the last thing I did was play the game for 1 or 2 hours, so with it being so fresh on my mind, it's no wonder that it influenced my dreams so much. Despite that, the dreams felt a little too weird, just a bit too real. My girlfriend would be coming over in the afternoon, stay for a few hours, and then leave in the evening. I decided that in the meantime, I could do a few more productive tasks before playing the game once again. I wanted to get at least 1 floor done. I wasn't entirely sure why I was so eager to get back into it after the nightmare I just had today. I suppose I just really needed to see what was next. After all, this seemed to be an extremely rare game, and searching for it online revealed no further details. I became a lot more like William, fighting through the fear and against demons in order to get to the bottom of that pyramid, or in my case, the game itself. Quitting now would also mean losing to my own paranoia, and I'm somebody who likes to finish what he starts. It was the only way to satiate my curiosity, and eventually I got around to it, starting the game up. This time around there was no background image on the title screen, nor was there any background music. It was simply the title of the game and the options. I found this quite off-putting, even for a horror game, and even in spite of the fact that I already knew that the title screen changed as you progressed through the game. For whatever reason, a completely black background and no music made it really eerie. I clicked continue, and there was still nothing wrong with the OSIS when I loaded into it. It really was a safe zone from all the horror. When I took the exit out of the OSIS, I found myself in a strange room that looked like the depths of a cave, with a caged elevator on the other end of it, which would also be my way down into the next level. This elevator sequence was quite long, in fact. It lasted 3 entire minutes in real time. The faint sounds of machinery from the previous level could still be heard near the top of the ride, but eventually faded. As the ride progressed and the light got dimmer and dimmer, what replaced them was instead faint, occasional whispering and a sort of rattling sound. After a really long way down the elevator, with lights flickering along the way, it finally reached the bottom. The next level turned out to be a decaying mix of a lab and a mortuary. It was extremely disturbing. I could practically smell the stench of death from my screen. The music just resembled static now, and the lights flickered on and off. It was a very dark level with almost no light source other than the few flickering light bulbs, so I had to use the Scarab amulet. Some of the cases were leaking brown, almost black fluid. Some of them were even opened and showed bodies that were wrapped in bandages at differing stages of mummification. It was the first time I realized just how harrowing Egyptian mummification truly was. Usually media explores finding a relatively clean body that then rises up and chases the characters through the halls of a pyramid. This game really put the death and decay into perspective, with all of them being covered in the brown fluid, and some of them were even missing limbs or other body parts. Some were even decapitated. The wrapping wasn't always perfect either. Sometimes they had openings that revealed carcasses, which were almost slowly turning into dust. However, every once in a while I would come across a body that looked slightly more fresh. Other than the multiple rooms acting as mortuaries, simply containing rows of cases with mummified bodies in them, were other rooms that resembled labs. Some of the labs, earlier in the level, only contained the things someone would need to perform a successful mummification, such as the bandages used for wrapping, the canopic jars for storing the organs, as well as the instruments used for removing the brain during the process. However, when I got deeper into the level, things started to change. They went from looking like mummification chambers to downright torture chambers. These rooms were stained with blood and had scratches that looked like they came from desperate attempts to escape. These rooms also usually contained chains and other devices used to restrain people, and sometimes body parts just laying on the floors. The most horrifying part, though, was that the instruments used for exturbation were also present and quite noticeably used. It appeared that the reason for some of the bodies looking more fresh was because they were. This also explained why a few of the bodies were missing their limbs. I guess the ones that got off gracefully were lucky to not be mummified while still alive. Things didn't stop there, however. Uncovering more of these morbid rooms, I eventually found ones with industrial and medical equipment, including sewing machines, drills, and circular saws. It appeared to be the origin of the enemies from the previous level. The faint whispering became nearly constant in these rooms. The floors were now drenched in that brown liquid, and I also noticed paintings depicting a shining eye of Horus within a triangle, surrounded by other occult symbols. They very clearly being used in an attempt to perform some kind of ritual, or to receive some kind of occult blessing. It appeared as though whatever horrible things happened in these rooms were done so in an attempt to achieve some kind of enlightenment. Maybe by torturing a person and turning them into a biomechanical monstrosity was seen as merciful, and a higher existence by whatever sick. Honestly, I wasn't even sure if who did this was a person in any way at this point, but I had a feeling I would get acquainted with them very soon. This level utilized all the spells and items that I had in some way. The knife, for example, was used in one puzzle to dig out a key from one of the corpse's eye socket. While the sonar spell could now be used to detect important items, such as keys lying around the several chambers of this level. The weirdest part was that this level didn't seem to have any enemies. It was eerily quiet, although that doesn't mean the level was without its own hazards. But other than a couple of traps, there wasn't really any danger. Usually I'd be relieved. However, it just made me feel all the more uneasy in this level. As I found the exit door, it became even more confusing that the game would simply just let me through. Right as I was about to open it, I heard a whisper behind me. I turned around and saw a tall, shadowy figure that disappeared too quickly for me to be able to tell any of its defining features. It was just like the thing I had seen in my nightmares, and I just didn't get it. I turned around quickly and made it the Osis, saved my game, and quit. I was pretty much frozen in place, unable to stop thinking about what I had just seen. This game was getting to me, more so than any other horror game. In fact, it stopped being the fun kind of fear a long time ago. Everything about this game, sure, the levels could get quite disturbing, the music was eerie, the idea of the descent through a long, lost pyramid is creepy. But what really got to me, what really made me want to put away the game for a long time was the nightmares I was having, the 2 consecutive, terrifying nightmares, and the game. Sure, I suppose I can explain the message I got the day before as just a coincidence. In fact, I could explain of all of this as just coincidental, but it no longer felt that way. There were too many things in common, and it was freaking me out. It freaked me out more than anything else did in my entire life. Following this, I was planning taking a long break from Pharaoh's Crypt. I'm sorry, but the figure from my nightmares somehow appearing in the game was the final straw. I pushed against my own psyche when I started up the game again today, but instead of finding answers, I just found more questions. Somehow I just knew that they were the exact same entity, no matter how hard I tried to deny it. I was wondering how the game would be able to do any of this. I suppose my questions would be answered if I just dug a little deeper. After all, I was surely getting to the end of the game now. Maybe one more floor left until I reached the bottom. I just had that feeling, I don't really know why. But at the moment, my sheer paranoia and anxiety completely overshadowed any kind of intrigue I had about that. More than anything, I just wanted the uncomfortable experience to be over. It was around 3 in the afternoon that my girlfriend, Jessica, finally came over. I was really happy to see her. Although, I suppose it would be a bit of a problem if excitement wasn't the first emotion I felt. We needed to come up with something to do. Now ordering a pizza did sound nice. But, as a fun date idea, maybe we could try making one ourselves. The problem is, I didn't really know where to start. so I decided to look up a recipe on the internet, as there were quite a few good ones. When I returned to my room, however, I found it strange that my PC had turned on. Or was turned on. I don't really know, I just couldn't remember turning it on, only turning it off. Maybe Jessica was the culprit. Either way, I just decided to brush it off. After a few hours of doing stuff together, watching movies and such, Jessica noticed that something was off with me. We were laying next to each other in bed when she inquired about my strange behavior. I didn't even notice it myself. She said I was more quiet than usual, and looked like I had something on my mind that weighed me down a little. I was of course hesitant to tell her about the video game, so I just told her I was probably just a bit tired. She didn't believe me, however, and kept insisting that I was acting strange, and that she knew something was bothering me. I thought about whether I should tell her some kind of made-up story, to put her concerns to rest. Maybe something like I lost my wallet and didn't find it yet, which seemed to be a good choice, since she probably wouldn't ask too many questions. So, I told her that I lost my wallet while walking home on Friday, to which she immediately called my bluff and said, "Chris, I saw your wallet in the living room on the dining table. I'm not stupid, you know? Now that the cat was out of the bag, I knew I had to come up with something else, or I could genuinely try to tell her the truth and hopefully not get sent to a psych ward." So I told her, "Jessica, look, please don't think of me as crazy. Just try to be open-minded." She looked obviously confused. Hopefully she wasn't worried I'd tell her I was cheating on her when I told her to be open-minded. But she was still obviously willing to listen to me, as she was clearly waiting for me to say something more. I have had 2 consecutive nightmares these past 2 nights, and they have made me feel somewhat unwell. I looked at her to see her reaction, but it didn't look like she had any objections yet. I think there's this game I started playing on Friday, and I think it has something to do with it. Jessica interrupted me. "Well, can't say I'm surprised. Maybe don't play scary games before bed then, you dummy." And here I was thinking it was something actually serious. I could have given up at this point, trying to explain it to her. However, that option didn't really cross my mind, and instead I felt the need to explain myself further. "It's not like that. I feel like the game is something more." She paused for a moment, clearly not understanding what I was trying to say. With a confused look, she replied, "What do you mean by that?" I wiped my face with my hand and rested my hand on her, signaling to her that I really meant what I was saying. I mean, like, the game is connecting with me in some way. It's hard to explain exactly what I mean by that. It feels like the nightmares are intentional, not coincidental. She laughed at me, obviously not taking me too seriously. After here I was a nearly grown man telling my girlfriend about nightmares I had because of a scary game. It is somewhat embarrassing when you think about it. She smiled and just told May, "Chris, you are such a baby. Hey, if it really scares you that much, why don't you show me later?" She was a lot more playful rather than concerned now, and began to touch me more while smiling and giggling the whole time. It was obvious she wasn't taking me seriously at all, and now seemed more interested in mingling with me. It's not like I could blame her too much, however. After all, I probably need to have a really good life if my biggest concern was bad dreams I was having because of a scary game. I also just didn't want to be a buzzkill either, and ruin our time together because of it. So I tried as hard as possible to not think about it, and simply live in the moment. After we got done, she decided that she would stay over, and I didn't have a problem with that. I was glad to have her by my side, in case I would yet again have another nightmare. There was still some time left, and we weren't really tired just yet, but I decided not to show her Pharaoh's crypt in the end. I was afraid it might just have the same effect on her, and that wasn't something I really wanted to risk. So, instead we just decided to watch some short movies and talk about life until we finally went to bed. That night I had a dream where I once again woke up paralyzed in the room with the sarcophagus. I can't say I was surprised at this point. I knew that this was coming, however that didn't lessen the sheer panic I felt in any way. It was quiet, save for the few faint whispers I heard, along with the sounds of banging and stuff falling way off in the distance. This dream also felt more vivid, even more so than the last one. Then, white paintings. Eyes began to float around all over the room. although for some reason I could once again tell that they were only something I was seeing, not something that was actually part of the scenery. Then, I heard a voice behind May. "What's the matter, Chris? You are slowing down. That is quite unfortunate. I had such high hopes for you." It was a deep voice, and I could immediately tell who, or rather what it was. I wanted to tell it that I just wanted it to stop, but I couldn't. Suddenly, however, it said, "You want this to stop." I didn't tell it anything, so it was frightening to know that it could now seemingly read my thoughts. I can't say, however, that it was anything groundbreaking for me at this point. "If you want this to stop, Chris, then you would listen to me and face your judgment." I couldn't really tell what it meant by that. Either way, I was beginning to feel even more afraid and panicked now. "Didn't I already tell you? You cannot turn back now. So finish what you started, Chris. Don't be a coward." The figure then teleported in front of me. This time I could see its features slightly better than before. But it wasn't anything that I could describe. It looked like a mix of an extremely old man and the rotting carcass of an animal. He pulled out a spear, and just as it was getting ready to do God knows what, I heard another voice say, "Chris, Christ, wake up. It's just a dream, it's all right. Nobody is..." I suddenly woke up and screamed. I was covered in sweat, but at least my girlfriend was right next to me, brushing my cheek in an attempt to wake me up. When I looked at her, she looked genuinely concerned. She was still holding my hand and making sure I was okay. I asked her what I was doing, and she told me, "Chris, you were shaking and mumbling the whole time. Are you okay?" I took a moment to collect all my thoughts and told her, "Yeah, I guess I am Jessica. Don't worry about me too much." I'll be honest with myself. I started to reconsider whether the hiking trip was such a good idea, considering the nightmares I was having. I also had no clear way to get rid of them, but I was at least glad Jessica managed to pull me out of this one. I was really grateful. In the end, I just pulled her closer to me and decided to get some more sleep. She still looked quite distraught, but slowly began to calm down once we embraced and eventually got back to sleep. When I woke up that morning, I was actually pleasantly surprised that I didn't have any other additional nightmare. Maybe it was finally going away. Jessica woke up at pretty much the same time and asked, "How are you feeling, sweetie?" I was quite groggy, which made sense since I didn't get true quality sleep for 3 days in a row now. But I still told her, "I feel just fine. I'll just need some coffee." She gave me a kiss and got up from bed. She headed to the living room while I just trashed around for a while more in bed, thinking about the night's events. I can't say I was surprised in any way at this point. More so just glad that she woke me up and the nightmare didn't come back at any later point in the night. When I finally decided to get up, I caught her making the coffee I'd indirectly requested for me, so I went up to her and hugged her. At this point, I was also well aware that I was going to have to go on that hiking trip soon, even if I wasn't feeling like I was in the best shape, due to lack of sleep in general. Before I did any of that, however, she decided to inquire further about what was going on. She confronted me while I still had my coffee in hand. "Chris, was that the third nightmare you had in a row? Do you have any idea why you could be having them?" I felt somewhat frustrated as I already tried to explain it to her yesterday. "Jessica, please. I told you. I think it's the game. Somehow it's get..." She interrupted me. "There's no way you'd be having these sorts of nightmares from a video game. These sorts of nightmares." I guess I never explained to her just how terrifying they were, although I suppose my behavior while I was having them spoke for itself. Also, if it really is the game, why don't you just stop playing it? Frustrated, I told her, "I already tried Jessica. I haven't touched it since you came." "Since I came. So you played it yesterday just before I came?" "Yeah." She burst out laughing. I guess I really was somewhat stupid. Maybe I really just needed more time, and I would let go of the game somehow. Just forgetting the entire thing exists felt like the best option. The rest of the morning we spent doing the usual together, until we finally had to go at around lunchtime. After lunch, which consisted of the leftover pizza from yesterday, I packed my stuff, made sure she was ready as well. When I went to my room, however, I found out that my PC was once again turned on, which was strange, but I didn't really think much of it, and just shut it off. After that, we got in the car, and I drove her back to her place. after which I was headed to our rendezvous point with my buddies. I arrived at around 2 p.m. It wasn't very far from my place, but a mix of strangely bad traffic from what I assume was an accident somewhere down the road and having to bring my girlfriend back to her place ate up quite a bit more time than I thought. At the very least, I wasn't super late, but it was still a few minutes after everyone else had already arrived. "Well, look, my friend's shout is," one with a sarcastic undertone. "Chris, good to see you, man." Another one added before following up with, "How are you feeling, Chris?" "Oh, I'm feeling great," I replied back, lying through my teeth. However, I was still hoping the hike would give me a rush of energy and dopamine. One way or another, being outside and in nature was a welcome change for me. I took my stuff out of the car, put on my backpack, and we started climbing the first hill of many. It all went well for the first few hours. I was actually feeling great. The exercise I got along with being with my friends, and the sunlight helped me get my mood up. Once the clock hit 6, the evening started to slowly roll around, and we needed to find a place to set up camp for the night. Going off trail and deeper into the forest, we eventually found an abandoned shack. It didn't seem like anyone owned it, so we took the risk and set up camp there. I didn't assume we would get lost as we still had our compasses and had a map of the area, which made it so that we could still tell what our approximate location was, and the nearest trail was only about a mile away. We put our sleeping bags and mats inside the shack and started a campfire outside. We had plenty of food, but we would probably need more wet wood to keep the fire going. And so I was sent out with an axe, one of my friends, and a hunting knife to find some more wet wood deeper off trail into the forest. Eventually we found a pretty good spot, although we were quite far away from our camp, completely isolated, and it was also getting dark now. Luckily my friend was making sure we wouldn't get lost, but for some reason I felt off. Not like I was sick, but more so like I was being watched. I began to chop into one of the fallen trees with my axe, and carefully took of large chunks of wet wood, when I noticed that the tree had a carving in it. It was of an eye, quite similar to those in my nightmares. Maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me, so I asked my friend if he saw it as well. "Yo man, take a look at this. Kind of weird somebody would just carve out an eye like this, right?" An eye? I don't know, seems more like just a circle to me. Circle. I guess some people just don't have as much imagination. Or maybe I am just paranoid. As I gathered just about enough wet wood, I was ready to go back to camp. I put all of it in my backpack, and just as I got up I saw a tall shadow briefly appear before disappearing right after amidst the trees. Quite freaked out, I told my friend in as calm of a voice as I could, "Hey, we should really get going." I tried to play it off cool, but really, I was in full-on fight or flight mode after I saw that shadow. Still, I told myself that it was probably just an animal or something. Surprisingly, nothing strange happened on our way back, and we got back to camp just fine. I put my backpack down, took out the wet wood, and we started making dinner while talking about the usual things. All of us were quite tired, but since we probably wouldn't be on a trip like this, just by ourselves for quite a while, we wanted to make the most of it. The 2 packs of beers one of my friends brought helped quite as well, but I didn't want to drink too much so that I wouldn't get hungover on top of everything else. We talked about the usual guy stuff, such as our lives, work, women, how we were enjoying the trip so far, and laughing at inside jokes from way back in the day, all the while drinking beer and cooking canned tuna and leaf soup above a campfire. The conversation eventually turned to video games. At first we talked about some of the games which were relevant at the time, such as Half-Life, GTA 3, before I eventually brought up Pharaoh's Crypt. I didn't really know why I brought up the game. Perhaps I was hoping that someone else here had played the game, and I could compare our experiences. Nobody else seemed to have even heard about the game before, that was except for one friend who, while not having played the game itself, read about it on a forum dedicated to obscure and rare games. I explained to him the game's mechanics and the variety of strange levels the game had, as well as the fact that the developer wasn't listed. "Oh yeah, about that," he interrupted me, in order to give me more insight about the game's origins. I read on the forum that the game's developers were tied to some kind of cult and didn't want to be tracked down for whatever reason. A cult, That was quite strange and also creepy. Also, the few people in the thread who had experienced the game strongly recommended against playing the game. They urged those who were interested to not seek it out. Yeah, I wish I had heard that before I got the game myself. Although to be honest, I probably wouldn't have listened and got the game anyway. As 9 p.m. slowly rolled around, we extinguished the campfire and went to sleep in the shack. We all noted that it was quite strange that usual sounds of wildlife during the night seemed to not be present. Maybe this area just didn't have a lot of animals. Then again, why would it not have? Another theory was that the campfire might have scared them off, which seemed like the best possible explanation. With a slightly eerie feeling, I drifted off to sleep once again. That night I had another dream where I woke up on a medical table inside one of the rooms from the 6th floor. I already knew what was happening, whether I wanted to admit it or not at this point. The game had a hold on me. I didn't know what to do about it. The figure appeared in front of me once again. Its footsteps were heavy this time around, but it didn't speak to me at all. All the times that it spoke to me before were terrifying already, but it, just slowly pacing around the room, not saying a word, induced a type of panic in me that I cannot even describe. That's when I heard rusted metal scraping against the floor. The next thing I know, it was towering over me with a rusted excerberation instrument. I desperately wanted to move, to scream, to do anything at all, but I was completely paralyzed. It jabbed the instrument up my nose, and I could slowly feel and hear it going right into my brain. Just as the pain was become too extreme, I woke up yet again covered in sweat. I checked around for my things before I heard the sound of one of my friends outside, screaming. This sent me into a panicked frenzy, and I quickly gathered as many necessities as possible and got dressed in order to investigate the strange sound and check if my friend was okay. I got out of the cabin, and a strong gust of wind immediately blew over me. It seemed like it was very windy outside. I quickly ran in the direction of the sound, and as I approached it, I began to have a strong, splitting headache. It was strange, as I didn't have any alcohol the day prior, and I wasn't too tired either, but that didn't matter right now. What mattered was whether my friend was safe. The closer I got, the more watched I began to feel. The feeling from the day prior was no longer something I could ignore. Then I saw it, my friend, with blood leaking from his mouth and completely pale skin. He stood completely still and had his chest pierced by a spear, which was held by a tall, dark, shadowy figure. I was absolutely losing it at this point. I didn't know what to think at all. Then the figure looked at me and simply said, "Run." It let out an inhuman scream. The paintings of eyes began to appear all around me, and the strong gust of wind now began to sound like a constant, faint screeching. And you'd be goddamn right that I turned around as fast as possible and began to run like never before in my life. Maybe I should have gone ahead and warned the others, but that didn't cross my mind at that moment. At this point, I just wanted to survive, and while some part of me knew what I was seeing probably wasn't real, primal instincts took over me, and I knew that if I didn't run now, I'd be seriously fucked. I quickly ran towards the direction of the nearest trail. All the while, more eyes began popping up between the several tall trees and watching me trying to run for my life. I never once looked back, but somehow I just knew that the figure was hot on my trail. I had felt its presence somehow. When I got back onto the trail, I had remembered that our camp was to the left, meaning that the way out was on the right, so I began sprinting in that direction. My pace had considerably slowed down. The ground beneath me began to feel heavy, but I could also tell that the eyes and the thing chasing me weren't about to be merciful or fair. The eyes were following me, tracking my every move, and the presence behind me was just getting closer the more I slowed down. So I wasn't keen on stopping at any point. I had so much adrenaline that the exhaustion I felt didn't slow me down at all. I was absolutely flabbergasted as to how any of this could be happening. I had no idea if I just well and truly went completely insane, or this was actually real. After several hours, I had finally made it out of the forest, with the only breaks I ever took only serving to give me the bare minimum time I needed to drink water so that I wouldn't die of dehydration or some kind of shock. My heart was still pounding, and for whatever reason I knew that I still wasn't completely safe. After about an hour more of just walking at a faster pace, I finally made it back home. I shut the door closed so hard my next door neighbors probably thought it was a gunshot. For a second, I just lied down on the floor, trying to catch my breath, before going to the bathroom to drink about 2 liters of water at once. It was still well into the night, around 3-5 a.m., and while I wanted to get more sleep, I still felt too unsafe and too afraid to go back to bed just yet. I took off the dirty clothes I had and just left them in the hallway for now. I got back into my room and my PC was turned on. The monitor was a black screen with the title screen of Pharaoh's Crypt on it. At this point, I had accepted that either the game was a cursed artifact made by a cult, or I had just well and truly lost my mind. I sat down, put my hands on my mouse and keyboard one more time, and braced myself to do what I now knew had to be done. The title screen also only had one option now, which was Face Your Judgment. I clicked the option and wasn't even taken into the Oasis. Instead, it seemed like I was placed right into the 7th floor of the game. This level was a large maze consisting of large tunnels, similar to those you'd see in a subway station. Everything was very gray, depressing, and I could almost feel just how cold they were from looking at my screen. Carvings of snakes littered the walls, along with references to an entity named Apophis. Every once in a while, several smaller snakes would pass by me, even if they didn't seem very interested. This was a place so impossibly far underground that any hope of making it back up to the surface was completely shattered. I had also noticed that the faint sounds of something large moving in the distance, which echoed through the large tunnels of the game, would every now and again feel like they echoed in reality, rather than from my speakers. The scarab amulet was seemingly stronger in this level, which seemed to be to compensate for the long and large tunnels of this area. I had cautiously wandered through the maze of tunnels, looking for some clue that would put me on the right path towards the exit door, which I assumed would lead me to the final level of the game. A few of the tunnels had doors on the side which I could enter, and they would always contain a puzzle I had to solve, which would give me pieces of a map, or interactions with NPCs which looked like trapped, white spirits that would give me hints to guide me through the maze. The puzzles seemed like a mix of all the puzzles from previous levels, with a peculiar focus on more snake imagery. There was even one where I had to guide a small snake through a maze of his own, where I would have to freeze traps in place or open doors with the light spell in order to help him get to the exit. Walking through one of the many tunnels, following my map, everything got strangely quiet. Then I heard it. A strong roar behind me scared the living daylights out of me, and I turned around to see a gigantic, rotten snake. It was a terrifying and massive creature with pitch, black holes for eyes, and all-consuming, gaping jaw, and it seemed to be so large that it barely fit into the tunnels despite how large they already were. I tried to run away from it, but this thing was simply faster than me and caught me. The death screen simply showed its jaw closing and everything going pitch black before hitting me with the game over screen. I was down to 4 lives now. This entity was extremely dangerous. It killed me 3 more times before I was down to 1 last life. I really didn't want to know what would happen if I lost that final life. My hands were shaking. But I had to do this somehow. Employing every trick in the book, using the sonar spell, checking every corner just in case, and collecting all the hints and map pieces along the way, I eventually found the exit door. It was at the end of another long tunnel. I made William sprint over to it, and just as I did so, I heard the loud roar behind me in real life. It sounded like my things were breaking in the living room, and I felt genuine fear as I quickly raced to the exit door before the giant snake could get me. As my character got through the door, I could hear an extremely loud thud on the door to my room. Had I not immediately looked, I would have guessed a bomb exploded outside of it and sent my door flying right through the window, but in reality it was completely fine. The sound seemed to be just a fragment of my imagination. There was no Oasis here either. I was just transported to the final floor of the game. It was exactly like my dreams, a maze with hallways made from meat. I was feeling extremely tired and dizzy at this point, but I needed this to end. There were no enemies or puzzles in this level. It was simply a maze with ambient music. After around 3 minutes of just walking around aimlessly, I had found the sarcophagus room. It was by far the shortest level in the game, but at this point that just made me glad. since I probably wouldn't be able to beat another long level, and had only one life left anyway. When I approached the sarcophagus, a cutscene began to play. The figure had, this time, actually appeared in the game, but I kind of just accepted that it was there now. I didn't really care for anything anymore. I was just glad this game was finally going to end. Then it spoke to me not through my speakers, but more like I was hallucinating its voice up. "Chris, I'm glad you are here, even if I needed to push you. Forgive me and don't worry, it will all be over now." It paused for a while before resuming with, "Are you ready to face your judgment?" The screen cut to the sarcophagus. It slowly started to open. The same intense screeching noise that I heard in my dreams began to emit from my speakers. And just as I almost saw what was inside, the game froze. I could hear and see something shooting out from my computer with sparks around it. But next thing I know, I'm laying on my floor and it's 8 p.m. in the evening. It seems like I had blacked out. I checked my clock and was in disbelief that I was seemingly unconscious for nearly the entire day. I had several missed phone calls from my friends, Jessica. Pretty much everyone you'd expect to be worried about me was worried about me. And I had missed calls and several texts from pretty much each and every one of them. Before I got to explaining everything to them, which I didn't even know how I would do, I decided to check what was going on. My computer wasn't turned on for one, and when I turned it on, there was nothing weird about it, except for the fact that Pharaoh's crypt seemingly completely disappeared, with no trace of it anywhere on my PC. Also, the disk that contained the game was now laying on the floor of my room and seemingly burnt. Not burnt, as in something was copied onto it. I mean, it was like it was actually lit on fire and turned into ash. It was no longer hot to the touch, but it was obviously no longer functional. I decided I would send it to the scrapyard tomorrow and never touch it again. I decided to text Jessica first. "Hey Jess, I'm okay, don't worry too much about me. I probably just drank too much yesterday or something. I'm back home, completely safe. I'm fine, just a bit tired." I didn't feel like calling her just yet. It was also quite late after all. After that, I needed to repeat the process for pretty much everyone I know before deciding what I was going to do with the rest of my day and how I was going to fix my sleeping schedule. Also, it just dawned on me that my car was still near the entrance to those woods, so I would go back for it the next day. Also, my friend who died. Well, he was seemingly completely fine since he texted me asking if I was okay as well. I eventually decided to get some sleep in order to fix my sleeping schedule, and luckily, I didn't have any nightmares. My life after this pretty much went back to normal after a few days, while I still had the occasional weird feeling every once in a while. After about 72 hours, it was like nothing had ever happened. However, I still needed to know more about the game. For months on end, all I would find was information that I already knew from threads I had already read on forums that I already visited. Sometimes I would find a new thread. One of them was even the thread my friend had mentioned back when we were out camping. That was until one day I decided to search for burnt disc with a weird video game on it. While the results didn't yield anything at first, I eventually found a report of a person being found dead in front of their computer, which had seemingly also turned off before they found him. It was later determined that the cause of death was an epileptic seizure, despite his family stating that he had no history or even any signs of epilepsy, and seemed to handle flashing lights just fine in the past. The thing that freaked me out, however, was that when they inspected his computer for evidence, they found a strange blank CD burned to a crisp. I've sat staring at this blank page for hours, wondering what to say and how to say it. My dad was the writer, not me. At least he wanted to be. Life got in the way of that. Me and my little brother Sam came along. He put all that on hold for us, didn't even talk about it most days. Just another dream dashed due to circumstance. He died last month. I don't know if it made it better or worse that we all knew it was coming. Even still, it didn't hit me for a long time that he was really gone. It only hit when I had to go through his things. Those little things that sat in the same spot for my whole life, now taken away to be repurposed. In their place, just a little shape cut out from the dust, waiting to be filled in. There was no money, no inheritance, and few noteworthy possessions, unsurprising as we never had much to begin with. All that's really left of him is in our memories, that and this book. I found it amongst his things, a big stack of papers, a whole completed novella, but never published. I knew he wrote about what happened, but I never knew he finished it. And I never saw a page of what he wrote. Much of what happened back in the winter of 2015 was lost on me. I knew lots of pieces, but they never fit together, and Dad wouldn't talk about them. I knew about the basement, I saw it. I knew about the voices, I heard them. I remember being afraid. I remember the sharp man. I remember when Sam disappeared. But how it ended, that I never knew. After 10 years, your brain tries to coat those memories with rationales. I did my best. I almost convinced myself it was all explainable. Then this stack of papers got in my hands. It was a while before I sat down and read it. I couldn't bear a snapshot into a life that didn't exist anymore. But given everything that happened, I knew I had to. For my answers and, more importantly, for his memory. That's also why I'm sharing this with you now. I don't want what happened to be forgotten like so much else has. I've lived in this house for 17 years more or less. Steph and I moved in while she was pregnant with our daughter Madison, and 5 years ago we added Sammy to the mix. Steph left not long after, not dead, just gone, so it's been the three of us here for the past 4.5 years. It's rugged, it's small, it's out in the middle of nowhere, but it's ours. Our driveway lies amongst a dense line of trees, easy to miss, off a long dirt road. The nearest neighbor is a 30-minute hike down that road. I've never met them. Even more trees surround our property. The woods behind our house stretches on for kilometers. Our own little slice of wilderness. Entering the house, you'd be faced with the living room, with the kitchen and dining area behind it, fairly open concept. All of the rooms, the 3 bedrooms, single bathroom, and door to the basement, lie tucked away in a long, narrow 7-shaped hallway beginning at the far end of the right wall. And that's it, that's our house. We keep up with it okay, we do what we have to. We can even make it look presentable sometimes, which is where the basement comes in. Our basement was unfinished. There was really nothing to it. Just a big open space with a cold concrete floor. Wooden beams and insulation patterned the walls and ceilings. It was freezing, it smelled, it was dark, and we just didn't go down there much. It became a place to haphazardly store all the stuff we weren't using, but didn't want to get rid of. I thought about getting it finished, but I never had the money. No, I didn't have the money or the time. The 2 of us raising 1 kid was hard. Me raising 2 kids alone was objectively impossible. But that's what you do when you're a parent. You hurt, you cry, you reach your limit, you go insane, and then you do it. Things were going okay. Maddie was all grown up, independent and doing well. And Sammy was developing into an actual human being, and not just a screaming badger. Because of this, I was able to work more hours, and not have to budget for a babysitter. Our lives were never easy, but we were in a nice period of calm and relative stability. Something I didn't know I could value this much. That soon started to change. I didn't believe in ghosts. I didn't believe in demons or haunted houses, and in the 17 years I lived here, I was never challenged on that. The house creaked like any old house. There were noises, but none that wouldn't be expected from living so close to the woods. We got critters, not ghosts. I doubt we would even be able to hear anything a ghost would do over the cicadas. Winter was different, though. All those noises went away. It could be eerie, the silence of it. When the wind was calm, when it was late at night, you could hear a pin drop. I chose to find it peaceful, but this winter, the winter of 2015, had other plans. I can't remember when it really first started. Like a lot of these tales, it began with a whisper. Little oddities, forgotten almost as soon as they occurred because they didn't merit additional thought. I had more pressing concerns. Work, bills, food, fixing the pipes, fixing my drapes, keeping Sammy away from sharp objects, and generally surviving the brutal Canadian winter. That and the 100 other things on my plate were more than enough to keep my mind occupied. If a door was closed when it should have been opened, I paid it no mind. I simply opened the door. That doesn't mean I didn't notice it, though. When it was 2 a.m. and I saw someone that looked like Sammy run past my door, only to check and find him still asleep in bed. I noticed that. I remembered that. When I washed my hands in the bathroom sink, and a little shard of the mirror dropped into the basin and down the drain. only for me to look at the mirror and see no missing piece whatsoever. I noticed that. When I turned the corner into that long, dark hallway, and I swore I saw the figure of a man standing in the shadows at the very end, only for him to be gone when I turned the light on. I definitely remembered that, but I didn't think there was a ghost. It was a trick of the shadows. It was my exhaustion. It was nothing. I lived in this house for 17 years and nothing has ever happened. Why would there be a haunting now? How can a house just suddenly become haunted? Well, I would get my answer soon enough, along with so many more questions. 2 days later, Friday night, the night I couldn't pass it off anymore. I got home from work at around 7. It was deep into the cold months now, so it was well after dark, and dark where we live is D.A.R. Kai. No light pollution, no bustling nightlife, barely even street lamps. You can't even see the trees in the woods, it's just black on black. You can see the stars though, that's why we moved here. The cold was ruthlessly brisk against my face. The snow was beginning to pile up, and I was praying that it would stop soon. So many exhausting hours, wasted shoveling this damn driveway already. I didn't want to go through it again this soon. I foots with my keys in the dark and opened the door, happy to feel the moderate warmth. After that time our heater broke 2 winters ago. I still get a little nervous every now and then. Safe for the moment though. I could also smell the cold pizza Maddie ordered. That is usually the scene. Maddie cooks sometimes and I cook on weekends. But for the most part I just give her some money and she orders whatever for the 2 of them and I eat what's left. Left side has mushrooms. Maddie's voice called out from her room down the hall. Gross, I replied. I walked over to the kitchen and opened the box to grab a fungus, less slice, but then I heard her call out again. Oi, by the way, what did you do to the basement door? What do you mean? I closed the box and walked into the narrow hallway. Maddie was standing in her doorway. Did you repaint it or something? She asked. I scrunched my brow. Why the hell would I repaint a door? Well, Maddie responded, then led me further down the hall to the basement door. Look at it. I scanned the door briefly. It looks the same. No, it doesn't. Look, it used to be all scuffed up around the knob, right? And there was that big scratch from when I let Sammy have the umbrella. I looked to the door again. She was right. There were no marks. It didn't look freshly painted, though. In some ways, it looked older. It was still worn, just worn in different ways. What the fuck? I responded incredulously. Bad word, Dad, said Sammy, no joining the conversation and giving me a hug. How's it going, Sammy? I greeted, while not taking my eyes off the door. Good, I'm bisexual. Sammy responded. Immediately I looked at Maddie, who was snickering. I can explain. Maddie muttered through her laughter. Why? Why did you do this? I asked, exaggerating my exhaustion. He heard me on the phone. He asked what it meant. I told him it's when you like guys and girls, that's it. And then he just started saying it. Maddie explained. I'm bisexual. Sammy repeated. Sammy, you're not bisexual, I stated warily. Yes, I am. He might be. Maddie interjected. He's 5, I rebuked. Everyone's journey is different, Maddie said, still snickering. I rubbed my temples and let out a deep sigh. Okay, buddy, you're bisexual. Just don't say it at school, okay? I don't want more phone calls. Maddie, what the hell happened to the door? I don't know. I was asking you. Did you open it? I asked, seeing that as the next logical course of action. No, not yet. I gingerly grasped the doorknob and began to turn it. It instantly felt different. Every door has a unique feeling to it. A specific smoothness and level of resistance when you turn the knob and pull it open. This door used to be snug. It used to take a bit of force, but now it was buttery smooth. This is a completely different door, I said in disbelief. No one came over or anything today, right? It could have been while we were at school. Maddie hypothesized. Why would someone break into our house and replace one door? It's just this door, right? Yeah, I think so. Maddie answered. Someone broke in. Asked Sammy. I almost forgot he was listening. No, of course not. I said, only to quell his fears. I stood pondering for a minute before I continued. I'm going to go down there and see if there's anything weird. I'll come, Sammy offered enthusiastically. No, Sammy, stay up here with your sister, I answered. As I looked over, I noticed Matty was already holding his arm, so he didn't run ahead as I opened the door. As I looked back, I was met with the pitch black abyss. I could only see about 3 steps down before they were engulfed. Unfortunately, the only light switch was at the bottom, but I knew these stairs well enough. I made my way down, unsure of what I expected to find. The stairs creaked and I was faced with utter blackness. I almost lost my balance on the last step as I miscounted the number of stairs, but I recovered. I blindly reached for the light switch on the right wall. I missed it first. I figured my muscle memory was thrown off, but I reached a little bit further and found them. I flicked the switch up and nothing. Still pitch black. I flicked the switch up and down a few more times. No luck. Light's not working. I called up. Grab the flashlight for me. I heard 2 sets of footsteps walk away. Suddenly, I felt a bit of unease creeping in. I couldn't put my finger on it, though. Something just felt off. Like I'm not supposed to be here. The cold began to give me goosebumps, and the smell, it was worse than usual. Got it. Maddie called down, startling me out of that weird headspace. Toss it down, I said, turning and cupping my hands. I could just barely see the silhouette of the flashlight coming down against the upstairs light, but I was able to catch it. I turned back to the curtain of blackness and clicked on the button. The beam shot out and I gasped, louder than I was expecting to. What is it? Maddie called down, clearly noticing the alarm in my voice. What the I stopped myself, less because I was concerned about swearing and more because my voice was taken away. All our shit's gone, I eventually exclaimed. I moved the flashlight all around, and sure enough, the basement was completely empty. All those years of clutter were gone. It was just bare wooden studs and insulation all around. The floor a completely barren concrete slab. Nothing was left. What do you mean? Maddie asked. I started to hear footsteps creaking down the stairs. I turned and ushered them back upstairs along with myself. Don't come down here right now. I'm calling 911, I said, trying to remain calm as I reached the top of the stairs and closed the door behind me. What happened? Are we going to die? Sammy asked. What? No, Jesus Christ, Sammy. We're fine. Just chill. Maddie, take him and go to your room. Okay, but what do you mean it's all gone? That doesn't make sense. Maddie asked incredulously. I struggled to explain it any better. It's all gone. Literally all of it. I don't know. I don't know. Maddie continued, attempting to wrap her brain around it. Someone took all our old junk. Didn't feel like taking the TV or the computers or anything. Yeah, maybe. I don't know what to tell you, I guess. They were pretty stupid. Still though, just stay in your room for now. Double check nothing else was taken and don't teach Sammy any new words, please. Sure, all right, Sammy. Let's go play in my room. We can explore your identity further. Maddie said as she walked him away. I tried to keep things light and not let on the gravity of the situation. I didn't want them to worry or panic. I wanted to manage this as much as I could. If I could make the kids believe it was just some idiot and they have nothing to worry about, that's what I would do. But I didn't think that was the case. Sure, what they did was peculiar, but they still got in and out without a trace. They knew when we wouldn't be home. They covered their tracks. There was a method to this. I called the police. I knew there wasn't much they could do. I honestly didn't care about recovering all our stuff. Like Maddie said, it was all junk. 9% of it wouldn't be missed. I just needed them to make sure we were safe. While I waited for someone to arrive, I checked all the windows and doors. We're a small, single-floor house, so there's not that many points of entry. Everything was locked up as it should be. I also managed to squeeze in a slice of cold pizza while I looked. There was a spare key under a rock on the walkway for the kids. Since I'm not always around, that was the only explanation I could think of. If this person was watching us, then they might have seen the kids use it. That thought deeply unsettled me. A single officer showed up at the door. Predictably, he didn't give much in the way of answers or solutions. He seemed as perplexed as I did. He checked out the basement a little bit, checked the windows and doors, took a little walk around the perimeter, then said to call if anything else happened. That was about what I expected, but it put my mind a little at ease that he didn't turn up anything alarming. He said the house seemed to be secure. so I just won't do the spare key thing anymore. He left and I went back to check in on the kids. Sammy was asleep in Maddie's bed and she was sitting up next to him scrolling on her phone. It made me both proud and sad to see Maddie be so good with her brother like that. She was truly a great kid. She always stepped up. I just wish she didn't have to. He's out? Huh, I said quietly. Yup, I use his dragon book, always works, Maddie replied. All right, I'll get him out of your hair, I said, walking over and picking up his limp 40-pound frame. So what happened? What are they going to do? She asked. Nothing but, hey, if anything, this guy did us a favor clearing that basement out. I bet it was Mom, coming back to get an old dress for a date or something, then covering her tracks by taking everything else. She barbed. I laughed. That would be interesting. I heard she was in Hawaii, though, with her second family. Really? I thought that's her third family. Oh, whoa. How many families does she have again? I don't know, but she is VRY happy. She sends me voicemails specifically telling me how much she loves all her other kids more than you, her. Oh, good for her. I know, right? You love to see it. You love to see people thrive. I joked as I walked out with Sammy. I acknowledged that this was maybe not the healthiest cupping mechanism to impart upon a child whose mother left her, but sometimes you just have to make fun where you can. There's only so much you can let it hurt, and it hurt for a long time. In reality, she wasn't a bad person. We both knew that, deep down. It was just easier to pretend that she was and make a game of it. Are we safe, though? Maddie asked, with a seriousness returning to her tone. Yeah, we're safe. We're locked up tight. I got rid of the spare key just in case it were good. I imagine they got whatever they were looking for anyway. I still tried my best to sound convincingly nonchalant. I put Sammy to bed, not bothering to be super delicate. That kid could sleep through Armageddon. Then I went to bed myself, indulging my ritual of watching an hour or two of TV on my old 90s box before passing out. I always liked the classic tube TVs, so when we finally upgraded our living room one to a slim fella, I kept the old one for me. The TV provided a decent distraction for a while, but I couldn't help thinking about all the weirdness of today. Never mind the past week. I could deny it to the kids, but I couldn't deny it to myself that I was spooked. Every now and then I'd mute the TV, thinking I heard something that was clearly just the house settling. I just had this feeling deep in my gut that something was very wrong, and that this wasn't over. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I habitually checked on the kids' eds at least half a dozen times and quadruple checked the locks. Eventually I allowed myself to calm down and drift off to sleep. I wish it lasted. Unfortunately, the night wasn't done with me. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of the phone ringing. Not my cell phone, but our landline out in the living room. Yeah, we still had a landline. Cell reception out here was spotty sometimes, so it helped, but it very rarely got any use anymore. I can't remember the last time I heard it ring. I don't even know how many people still had the number, let alone who would have the number that would call this late at night. I hesitantly walked over and picked it up, instantly overcome by the loud sounds of audio distortion and crackling. Hello, I asked quietly. Who is this? There was no immediate response amidst the noise, so I gave it one more louder attempt. Hello. After about 20 seconds of dead air, an old and sickly voice simply uttered, I remember. Then the call cut off. I stood there in the dark, petrified, listening to the dial tone. What the hell did that mean? Was this a threat? Was this the person who robbed us? I thought maybe it was at first, but when I really analyzed the voice, it didn't seem red. They sounded bad. They sounded like they were on death's door. And the way they said it, it didn't sound threatening. It didn't even sound like they were talking to me. I had no idea what to make of it. I chalked it up to a wrong number, but the timing of it was just too freaky. I had an even harder time getting back to sleep after that. It was a race to fall asleep before the sun rose. I just barely was able to. Most Saturdays would begin with Sammy waking me up unceremoniously at around 6 or 7 a.m. for one thing or another. These days he at least whispers instead of screaming and jumping on my chest. This morning though, no Sammy. I woke up by myself around 8:30. I couldn't help but feel relieved. It's exceptionally rare that my sleep gets to end naturally, so I decided to savor it until a thought crept into my head. Everything from the night before was lagging behind my consciousness, but it all came back to me in a rush. Sammy didn't always wake me up, but for him to not wake me up today, I had to go check on him. I rushed out of bed and down the hallway. I peeked into Maddie's room. She was there. Good. One sigh of relief. Then I reached Sammy's room and gone. I felt the urge to panic, but I talked myself down. He could be up playing in the living room or something. So I moved quickly to the living room, but still no Sammy. I moved to the bathroom. No Sammy. I went to the kitchen. I double-checked Maddie's room. I double-checked my room. I looked in the front yard, the backyard. The damn linen closet, nothing. My heart raced. I couldn't breathe. Fear and guilt swirled like a hurricane in my head. Why did I let him sleep alone after all this? Why didn't I keep watch all night? No, this can't be happening. Then it hit me one place I forgot to check. The basement. A chill ran down my spine as I thought of it. But why, though? Why would this thought fill me with dread? It was just our basement. I couldn't understand it. I walked to the basement door, with its subtle unfamiliarities. The knob turned easy and the door gave no resistance, like it was begging to be opened. This time, the basement wasn't a pitch-black void. The early morning sun shone its light through the small window on the far end and generously illuminated the space I was descending into. I could see all the stairs now, and yet even so, I still almost tripped at the end. That was odd, but I couldn't dwell on it. In the middle of the gray concrete, I saw my boy lying there on his side in his jammies. I was so relieved. I wanted to rush over and squeeze the life out of him, but I resisted the impulse and instead gently lifted his face off the cold floor. He began to stir as I did. "Dad," he muttered weakly. I breathed one more sigh of relief. "Holy shit, Sammy, you scared me to death. What are you doing here?" "My bad word," he responded. "I know. I'm working on it. I really am." "Where am I?" "You're in the basement, buddy. You don't remember coming down here." "No, but I was dreaming about it, I think." That answer creeped me out a little bit. Sammy had never sleepwalked before. "God, you're a weird kid." "Okay, let's get you out of here. It's freezing." "You could have frozen your damn face off on his concrete." I hoisted Sammy up and put him on my back and started to walk out, but then I began to really take in my surroundings. This was the first time I could actually see the basement in decent enough light since the incident, and it was wrong. The stairs. I didn't miscount them. There were one too many. The light switch really was a few inches further from the corner than it should be. Not only that, the wooden beams across the ceiling, the studs across the walls, they were spaced a little too far apart. The insulation, the pipes, the wiring, it all looked off. Even the ceiling hung ever so slightly higher. It wasn't just the door that was different now. Everything was different. This was not our basement. I couldn't believe my eyes. This had to be some kind of mistake, some kind of trick. I quickly brought Sammy upstairs, my first instinct being to get him out of this place. Then I headed back down. How could I not? I had to make sense of this. I stared into the uncanny open room. I tried to fit the square peg of what my eyes were giving me into the round hole in my memory, but it would not fit. Did it just look different because it was empty? No. This wasn't just some remembered temporary space that could change without me knowing. This was 17 years of my life. It was just not the same room. But how? I looked at it from every angle. To remove all of our belongings and perform a complete structural renovation, this would have had to be done over weeks. There was about a 6-hour window every weekday where no one is home. They would have had to bring trucks, hire contractors, then do a complete clean and leave no trace, no smell, no anything, before 3 p.m., and I guess just hope that nobody came home early or checked the basement before it was done. Even assuming that it would be possible to do this, which it wouldn't be. Why replace a room with another room that looks almost identical but not quite? If they were really trying to make it look like the same room, they could have tried harder. With the amount of dedication it would take to complete this project, surely they would know to get the number of stairs right. They don't seem concerned with convincing me it's the same room, so what is the point? And what was that sound? I thought I heard it the first night when I came down, but I was too shocked to really process it. What was it? It was some kind of a ticking sound. Very faint, almost inaudible, but the basement was so deathly quiet otherwise couldn't help but fixate on it. I listened harder. Tick-tock. A clock. Definitely a clock. But there was no clock here. I scoured the place again just to be sure. Nothing, and the sound never seemed to get closer no matter where I moved in the space. What was making this damn sound, and where was it coming from? It was driving me insane, all of it. Every single aspect of this impossible room. They always say the most logical explanation is usually the right one, but this had no logical explanations. The closest thing to a logical explanation was that I was losing my mind. I had to look harder. There had to be something here that could tell me more. As I scanned the walls, I saw something that might have answers tucked away in the back, obscured by the stairs. The breaker box. That had to tell me something. Would it still work? Would it still be all wired in? Would the labels I scribbled next to the switches still be there? I walked over and prepared to open the door. Dad. Maddie's voice called out, startling me. Maddie. Shit, you scared me. What are you doing up so early? Sammy woke me up. I looked over and saw both of them standing in the middle of the concrete floor. I didn't like seeing them in this place. It felt dangerous. Foreign. Unknown. Maddie continued as she took a look around the somewhat lit room. What's going on? I began ushering the two of them up the rickety stairs. It's okay. Everything's fine. Let's just stay out of here for now, all right? I got the three of us out and shut the door behind me, trying to shake the weirdness from my head. I'm hungry. Sammy piped up. Before I could answer, Maddie stepped and go sit at the table, Bud. We'll grab you something in a second. I could instantly read her intentions. She saw it too. Yeah, how about I make us all pancakes, huh? I offered. It's been a while, hasn't it? Yes. It's been forever. Sammy said dramatically before running off with a huge grin. Maddie turned to me, her expression filled with worry. What the hell was that? She uttered softly. Maddie, I really don't know. My instincts told me to play dumb and not scare her, but I knew I couldn't. But you saw it, right? I mean, obviously you noticed. Reluctantly, I had to admit it. Yeah, I noticed. How is that possible? How did that happen? Her voice now filled with unease. I told you, I don't know. I answered as calmly as possible. What the hell do we do? I'm working on it. I'll figure we'll be fine. Until then, we're just not going to go down there anymore. I'll get a lock so Dummy doesn't sleepwalk down there again. Sammy sleepwalked. Sammy doesn't sleepwalk, Dad. Maddie, we will be fine. I promise. I asserted. I hated lying to them. I wanted to be that dad that never lied and always told it like it is, but I just can't bear having them as worried and scared as I am. So I had to employ the dad bravado, put the bass in the voice, exude confidence. You're safe with me because Dad can handle anything gimmick. I got pretty good at putting that on over the years. I had to, it was a necessity. But it always felt like cosplay. Pretending to be the dad I wished I was. The fear I felt today was just another, stranger version of the fear I've felt 100 times. I never knew what I was doing. I never knew how to raise them. I was unqualified and in over my head from day one. This was another level of unqualified. The day went by as normally as it could. We had a movie night. It was a good way to keep the kids close to me for a while. Sammy was his usual self. Maddie didn't bring up the subject again, though I could see it in her eyes. Eventually they went off to bed, but not me. I waited until I knew they were asleep. Then I grabbed my flashlight and headed downstairs again. Back into the dark. My instincts told me not to go down there again, but I had to see the breaker. I readied myself for the extra step and made it down safely. The basement looked horrifying to me now, especially in the dark. This space that shouldn't be empty, this space that's so familiar but ever so slightly wrong. Sitting below us every moment. I began to think how long it had been since I was in the basement before all this. How long could it have been like this and gone unnoticed? Weeks. I shuddered. Tick-tock. Tick-tock. That maddening sound remained. The sound with no discernible origin amidst the complete silence. That was another thing that bothered me, but I didn't know why until this moment. It shouldn't be silent. I should hear the low hum of the boiler. I should hear the rattling of the pipes as hot air gets pumped through. But I didn't. It was dead down here. That was the word that kept flashing in my mind over and over. It's dead. But if it was so dead, then why didn't I feel alone? I hurried over to the breaker box. It looked about the same on the outside. Big gray panel with a door. Promising, but I don't imagine they come in too many variants. Then I opened it and shone the flashlight inside. It was wrong. The switches were wrong. The labels by the switches were wrong. Still handwritten, but not MY handwriting. I looked at the labels themselves. Bath 2. Didic. We don't have those rooms. This made even less sense. I stared at the labels, trying to somehow figure out what this all meant. Then I felt the gentlest little movement in the air, hitting the back of my neck. So subtle that I may not have paid it any mind, except for the fact that it was warm. I gasped. Goosebumps instantly formed all through my body, and I spun around violently, pointing the flashlight to face to origin of that sensation. All that the flashlight illuminated was the empty room. I didn't know what to believe. I didn't know what I thought that was. What I did know was that I did not want to be here anymore, so I made a break for it. I scurried upstairs, shutting the door, and then attempted to shake off the fear. I propped an extra chair from the kitchen table in front of the door so Sammy couldn't get down there again. I was at a loss. My brain was filled with questions, but I felt powerless to do anything about it. What could I do? How could I get answers? I walked down the hall to my bedroom. I sat in bed and hopped on my laptop to try a few internet searches, but to no avail. Nobody else seemed to have had an experience like this before, or at least they hadn't posted about it anywhere that I could see. But then a sound broke my concentration. A familiar sound. The landline was ringing again. I felt a sense of dread course through me. This couldn't be a coincidence, and I didn't want to hear that voice again, but I had to answer. I walked out of my room, through the hallway, sidling past the chair against that damn basement door, and into the living room. I could barely see anything, just a haze of dark blue on black, but I could maneuver well enough. I made it to the phone and picked it up. Hello. I spoke, hesitantly. I was immediately confronted with thick static again. No semblance of a voice within it. Hello, I repeated. I waited about 20 seconds listening to the static before deciding to give up, but just as I pulled the phone away from my ear, I heard a fraction of a voice. The slightest hint of vocalization. I couldn't make it out, but it didn't sound like the same one as before. I put the phone back to my ear. Who is this? I asked, waiting another 10 seconds. Daddy. A childlike voice spoke from the other end. A chill ran through my entire body like a shockwave. It was muffled, barely audible through the static, but I could tell it was a young voice. Who is this? I asked again, trying to enunciate more. Daddy, they repeated with the same inflection and intonation. They sounded a bit surprised, like they weren't expecting to talk to me. I think you have the wrong number. Again, the exact same, like it was a playback on loop. Then the call dropped. I just stood there holding the receiver in my hand. What the hell was that? Any other time, I might have thought that was a random wrong number, but with everything happening, it couldn't have been. Who was that kid? They sounded about Sammy's age. It almost sounded like it was Sammy, but Sammy doesn't call me Daddy. No, creeped out and confused beyond my wits. I could only just compulsively check the door locks and windows again. It felt like the only tangible thing I could do. Doors locked. Windows locked. I looked out each window, not sure what I was expecting to see. Hopefully nothing. Though it was easy to see nothing since it was basically just pitch black dotted with falling snow. The only outside light being in the front yard. The faint glow of a somewhat nearby streetlight cascading in through the gap in the wall of trees where the long gravel driveway starts. As I looked out the living room window, I knew the view I expected. I knew that subtle fuzz of soft light. How it would be partially broken by the silhouette of my car in the driveway. That was the view I expected. It wasn't the view I got. Sure, it was mostly the same. But there was a second silhouette blotting out the light, right near the entrance of the driveway. A figure, just standing there. I almost jumped out of my skin. I was already on edge, but this nearly sent me over the top. There was no good reason for a person to be standing there in the middle of the night. I contained myself just enough to put the figure into focus and see what it was. It was small. Maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. It was difficult to tell from the distance. A child. A little boy. I began to panic. Was it Sammy? The silhouette didn't look exactly like him, but I had to check. I sprinted through the living room, through the narrow hallway, and burst into Sammy's room to see if he was still in bed. He was gone. That figure must have been him. He must have been sleepwalking again. I ran back out through the hallway, through the living room, and through the front door, not bothering to grab my coat or my boots, which was a mistake. I barreled down the driveway, the few inches of snow on the ground providing little comfort against the sharp, jagged gravel. I winced in pain and shuddered as the unforgiving cold pierced my body. But when I reached the end, the figure was gone. I looked down both sides of the road and couldn't see anyone. Sammy. I yelled out in either direction, to no response as puffs of ghostly steam floated from my mouth. I wanted to run out and look further, but without any light, it would be hopeless. I needed my car. I sprinted back into the house and grabbed the keys. But then I stopped as critical thought began to flow into my panicked mind. I didn't want to have to bring Maddie into this, but I had no choice. I had to wake her up and get her to keep watch in case he came back. I ran through the living room and down the hallway to Maddie's room. But once again, my brain stopped me before opening her door. I had a realization. In all the tias, I missed it. Something so obvious. I ran down the hallway when I was checking if Sammy was there, and I ran down it again now, unimpeded. The chair I propped up in front of the basement door was gone. I knew where Sammy was. He wasn't outside at all. He was down there. I didn't hesitate. I opened the door and descended the stairs. Flashlight be damned. Sammy. I called out into the opaque blackness. I slowly stepped across the concrete, careful not to bump into Sammy if he was indeed here. My eyes didn't adjust to the dark at all. I knelt down, feeling around, hoping to find Sammy asleep like he before, but my hand wasn't catching anything, and it was so cold. Sam. I yelled into the blanket of darkness. Daddy. A deathly soft childlike voice called out from behind me. I jumped and spun around to face it. It wasn't Sammy. It couldn't have been, but it sounded close. Dad. Another soft voice called out from almost the same direction, just a little bit to the left, so similar to the other one, but ever so slightly more distinct and clear. T-Ice was Sammy. It had to be. But what the hell was the other voice then? It sounded exactly like the voice from the phone. I hurried cautiously in his direction, and eventually my hands found him. I grabbed him and pulled him into a hug. Oh, Sammy. There you are, I exclaimed, relieved. Buddy, what are we going to do about this sleepwalking? Sammy didn't hug me back. He just stood there in silence for a moment. I heard his soft breathing. For a split second, a terrifying thought entered my mind, but it washed away when he finally responded. I wasn't sleepwalking. He mumbled. I was confused, but I scooped Sammy up and rushed him upstairs before I questioned him further, closing the door tight behind us. I caught my breath for a second, then knelt down to look at him. He looked dazed and pale. You weren't sleepwalking, I asked. No, Sammy responded warily. Then why did you go down there? I told you not to go down there anymore. I'm sorry, Dad. The man made me go there. He explained, his tone of voice never changing. The man. My blood went cold and my breath got caught in my throat. What man? Who are you talking about? The scary man. From my dream, the sharp man. Lost my words for a minute. I lost to know how to respond to that. What did the sharp man mean? So, you were dreaming then? I questioned. No, he's for real. He's one of them. He's down there. Sammy continued to murmur. I thought about the other voice in the basement, the voice on the phone, the figure outside. Is he a boy? Is he little? I asked. No, he's tall like you. But he's very scary. I don't like him. I don't like how he smiles. That gave me shivers. Now I was thinking about the figure I saw standing at the end of the hallway, just before this basement thing started. I almost forgot about that. That figure was tall. Were all of those odd little things related to this? Okay, I accepted. Why is he sharp? That's what we call it. Sammy answered cryptically. That's what you call what? Who's we? Sammy just shrugged his shoulders and let out a deep yawn. The kid looked barely awake, so I stopped my line of questioning for now and put him to bed. Didn't want to freak him out too much. I took inventory of what I knew as I sat awake in bed. The the static from the old TV hissing at me. The basement was not my basement. There was a sharp man. There was a child. There was the other sickly voice. There was that shard of the bathroom mirror that broke off but then didn't. What did it all mean? How did it connect? More importantly, what do I do? How do I keep us safe? Should I leave? I thought. Should I take the kids and run? It was tempting, but where could we go? I couldn't afford another house. Shit, I couldn't even afford an apartment these days. Wherever we went, we would have to come back. No, there had to be a way to fix this. I just needed help. The biggest hurdle I had to overcome was accepting that there were forces at work beyond my understanding. I'm an atheist. I believe in science. I believe in what can be proven. I've lived that way for my entire life, and I'd never had it disputed until now. But I was getting nowhere expecting a rational explanation to pop up out of thin air, so I had to remove that from the equation. Once I acknowledged that I could not understand these things, the clearest option became to find someone who could. Lynn Barnes, parapsychologist and psychic medium. I found her on Facebook. Her page looked promising and she seemed nice. I scheduled her to come over the following afternoon. I didn't get much sleep that night. I spent the early hours of the morning tiddying up. It had been a hot minute since we had a guest. Sammy awoke, not seeming to sweat any of what happened the previous night. Maddie crawled out of bed a few hours later. "Foe, you cleaned," she said in a groggy voice as she wiped the sleep from her eyes. "Yeah, we're going to have someone coming over in, well, any minute now, probably." Oh. Ooh, the words formed in my brain got stopped by the bouncer before they could exit my mouth. It sounded stupid. I tried to find another way to say it, but I was unsuccessful. "Hey, psychic," I said, trying to sound assured in my decision. Immediately, Maddie let out a chuckle. "That's what we're doing." "Hey, listen, it couldn't hurt to get another perspective, all right?" I explained. "But a psychic! She contested. Dad, that stuff isn't real." "Yeah, well, neither is any of this. Let's just give her a chance. See what she has to say." Maddie sighed. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to be honest with me." "What's your question, Maddie?" "Did you find them on Facebook?" I shot her a glare. "Okay, see, this is why I don't bring you into the decision-making process. You're just all judgment." "Dad, what the hell? We're giving her a chance. We're being open-minded, okay? Then if you have a suggestion, I will be open-minded to your suggestion," I said in full dad voice. She shook her head and rolled her eyes all at once. Admittedly, it seemed like a good idea at 2 a.m., and maybe less so now, but I had to commit. A car rolled down the driveway right on cue. Out stepped a middle-aged woman with graying curly hair wearing a loud, patterned dress, along with a younger, sharply dressed blonde man. They rang the bell and I opened the door for them with a smile, inviting them inside. I asked them about the drive up and all the usual nice things you're supposed to say before you actually start talking. Maddie stood there silently with a facetious grin. Eventually, we all got seated in the living room. "I know I got here a little early. I hope you don't mind," Lynn said. She had a very kind and disarming voice. "It's just that I could sense some urgency when we talked, so I wanted to get here right away, and you never know with the weather these days." "Oh no, that's perfect. Thank you for coming. I don't know exactly where to... I never really believed in this stuff, you know." Lynn chuckled. "Oh, don't worry, I get that all the time. I know it's a lot to try and understand." "It is a lot, yeah. This whole thing has been crazy. I bet. You said it's just you and, was it 2 kiddos?" "Yeah, just me and Madison here, and Sam, he's in his room." "And the mother, is she going?" She's gone," I said, not caring to elaborate. Lynn nodded. "See, that makes sense." "Oh, that makes sense." I questioned. "I've been feeling it ever since I walked into this house. Sometimes these things take a little time for me to read clearly, but other times it can be just like that." Lynn snapped her fingers. "I know this may be hard for you to hear, and you're not going to want to believe it, but there is a presence here, Mr. Lewis. This is going to be difficult, but I believe the spirit of your wife still resides here." "Is that so?" I responded flatly. I looked over at Maddie only to see her staring daggers at me. I responded with a defeated sneer. "Wes, but what she wants you to know, Ed, And what's important that you know is that even though she has left this plane, she will never truly leave you. Maddie made some kind of noise. Looking over again, her head was hanging down and her hand was covering her mouth. So Maddie was right. I was wrong. I let the psychics finish up their whole rigmarole and they went on their way. Predictably, they made no mention of a child or a tall man or anything of the sort. As I closed the door, I didn't even have to look at Maddie to see the smug look on her face. "Shut up," I said as I walked by. I just, yeah. What's your idea then? I'm all ears," I scoffed. "Okay," Maddie began. "First off, a construction worker. Or an architect. Someone who builds or renovates houses. Get them to come in and see what they can tell us about the basement. They would probably be able to find serial numbers, model numbers. Something that can be traced back to a manufacturer. There would have to be a paper trail somewhere. You just went straight to, ghosts did it. Someone had to build this. Someone had to get the materials from somewhere. Okay. Sure, that might give us something. Good idea. I know a few contractors. I can talk to them. But I didn't just jump to ghosts, Maddie. You didn't see. I cut myself off. Didn't see what? She pushed. I shook my head in silence. I didn't want to drag her into this any further than she already was. I felt bad enough involving her at all. Maddie studied my lack of response before finding her words. "You can tell me shit, you know. Like, I can maybe help." No. Maddie repeated, taken aback. "Yeah, no. That's not how this is supposed to go. I know you're 17 now, but you're 17. You're my kid. This is not yours to deal with. It's mine. It's my job. Really." Maddie responded with offense clearly taken. "Dad, you have always needed my help. Ever since Mom left. I know you're proud or whatever, but this isn't about pride. This is about you." I snapped. "You shouldn't have to deal with these things. You are a child." "Yeah, but I do. I do deal with them." Her voice raised. "And it's fine that I deal with them because they need to be dealt with and you can't do it alone. That's the situation we're in. Shouldn't doesn't matter. What matters is Sammy, and he needs both of us." I'd like to think that I was telling the truth when I said it wasn't about pride. But when she said I couldn't do it alone, it did hurt. It hurt because she was right. It hurt because this wasn't the first time we've had this conversation. Sammy is what matters. "But you're both my kids, you matter too," I responded. "Shut up, Dad. Don't start talking like that." My eyes widened. "Did you just tell me to shut up?" "Wes, I did." A smile began to form on her face. "Wow," I scoffed. "You deserved it." She added, "Did I?" "Yes. You know, if I was a different kind of dad, you would not be speaking to me that way." "Yeah, if... Now just tell me what's really going on." Maybe it was just me being a pushover, or maybe it was because I agreed with her when she said that Sammy needs both of us, but I told her. I explained the phone calls, the voices, the figures, the things Sammy was saying. I told her about the sharp man. I could see in her eyes that she was trying to wrap her head around it in real time. I don't know if she fully believed me, but I knew she was all in regardless. I couldn't help but think I made another mistake by telling her. She said she would look online for anything that might give us answers. I already tried, but she was way better at navigating the online world. She could always sort the real stuff from the bullshit. I don't know how, I left her to it. That night, I moved Sammy's bed into my room. I closed my bedroom door and hung a wind catcher from the knob so I would be able to hear if anything moved. That put my mind somewhat at ease. The thought of going back to work in the morning didn't sit right. I couldn't wait a week to find out what's going on. I had a window while the kids were at school to figure this out, and I had to use it. Luckily, I had accumulated about 4 sick days in almost 15 years, and it was time to put them to use. I called in, and then I called a friend who does home renos to come over tomorrow. Maddie was right, that might be something. Then it was time to try and get a good night's sleep, though I knew it was wishful thinking. The first time I awoke was only a few hours after falling asleep. I awoke to the faint sound of the landline ringing once again. I was tempted to go pick it up, but nothing was going to make me leave Sammy alone, not even for a second. I let it ring, and eventually it stopped. Sammy was still in his bed, fast asleep. Thank God. The second time I woke up to a different familiar sound, along with a bright flickering light illuminating the room, the glow of the TV, and the hiss of the static. I was so used to this sound. I'd accidentally fallen asleep with the TV on many times. I sat up and first checked Sammy's bed. The lump under the blankets and the mess of brown hair sticking out of the top of them was gone. Sammy was gone. Before I could panic, however, my eyes moved to the TV and there he was, his head silhouetted in front of the snow. He was just sitting and staring at it. Relief quickly turned to unease. I creaked my way out of bed and knelt down beside him. He didn't acknowledge me in any way, just kept staring at the screen. "Sam, what are you doing?" I called out quietly. They always say the same things. Sammy muttered, not averting his gaze. "Who does?" "They all do." I was as confused as I was tired. "What are they saying?" I asked. Sammy pointed at the screen and just said, "Listen." But curiosity outweighed my trepidation and I slowly leaned towards the fuzzy screen. "It's just noise, Sammy. It's static. Listen," he repeated. I focused all my attention to the scraping hiss. I sat there trying to immerse myself enough to hear beyond the garbled mess, but nothing came through, until... Daddy! That voice, the voice from the phone, the one from the basement. It was hidden deep within the hiss, but it was there. I jerked backwards in confusion and horror. Sammy kept staring. Another minute or so passed. I was intent to hear more. The sound began to feel almost hypnotic. I began hearing scrambled up voices, but I couldn't tell how many of them were real and how many were just my mind playing tricks. Words started coming through. Faraway words, like screams in a hurricane. "No," yelled a desperate and horrified feminine voice. "I don't want to," pleaded another feminine voice. "Why am I here?" asked a confused masculine voice. "The house," said a deeper masculine voice. "I'm sorry," uttered a mournful masculine voice. Over a dozen of these little meaningless phrases popping up through the snow and repeating at random intervals. Maybe it was picking up some kind of signal or interference. That's what my rational brain wanted to think. But we were beyond that now. I remember. That old, sickly voice from the first phone call returned as well, filling me with dread. Amongst all the odd phrases scattering through the noise, two stood out to me because they were names. Jacob yelled in a terrified manner, but even more chilling was Caleb, uttered through violent sobs and hysterical screams. It was ghastly. Jacob. Caleb. Who were they? Who were any of these people? What did the words mean? Why did they repeat over and over? My mind spun with questions as my hypnosis deepened. I could only listen and I could only stare. I listened to the words so many times, trying to gauge their exact cadence, trying to decipher their purpose. I think at some point I forgot to blink because the only thing that broke me from my gaze was the intense discomfort in my eyes. I shut and rubbed them vigorously to remove the stinging. The bright 4x3 rectangle was seared into my vision. It took minutes for it to fade away. "Sammy, stop staring at the TV. Go back to bed, okay?" I said through closed eyes. But when my eyes opened, Sammy was no longer sitting beside me. He was back in his bed, turned towards the wall like he'd been at the beginning of the night. I looked over at my alarm clock, and it read 4:02 a.m. 2 hours had passed. This couldn't be possible. Was I really transfixed for that long? Had the time really gotten away from me like that? When did Sammy go back to bed? Did he ever actually get up? Fatigue overwhelmed my senses, and I collapsed on my bed. When I woke up for a third time, it was finally morning. With the clarity of the sunrise and my somewhat well-rested consciousness, it seemed to me like last night was a dream. That experience didn't feel quite as grounded as this felt now. Though I couldn't definitively say either way. It frustrated me not to know, but I still made sure to remember those names. Martin came by early in the morning, right after I sent the kids to school. It was quite a task trying to explain to him what I needed without sounding crazy. I decided the best explanation was no explanation at all. I simply told him to look around the basement and see what he can tell me about it. He looked around with me for about 15 minutes. At first he seemed unsure and lackadaisical, but I noticed his brow start to furrow at certain things. He started looking more vigorously, and he'd shoot me these confused looks. Finally, he walked over and gave me his conclusion. "Well, it looks like a basement." "Great," I answered sarcastically. "I mean, it outcasts like a basement. Who built this? That's what I'm trying to figure out. What do you mean it low? Yes, like a basement. I mean it is a basement, obviously, but it's not functional. The breaker is for a completely different house. Some kind of dummy breaker. I don't know what that's about. It's wired in, but there's zero electricity going through it. The boiler is just for show. It doesn't seem to have been turned on in years. I don't know how you're getting hot water or power. The air vents are constructed fine, but they don't seem to match up or make sense for the way your house is laid out, and, again, they're not functional. But I have electricity, I challenged. I feel heat coming from the floor vents upstairs. How does that work? It doesn't. It shouldn't. I mean, I don't know if you're trying to fuck with me or what's going on here, but I cut him off. What if I told you all of this happened last week? What? What do you mean happened? I mean, my basement wasn't like this before, I explained. The boiler worked, the breaker was fine, everything was fine. Then someone changed it to this. That's not possible, Adam. Look at the boiler, look at the pipes, look at the state of them. No one changed this. It's clear as day. This has not been moved or touched in years. Okay, I get that. But it happened, it changed. Everything changed. It wasn't like this before. You're saying there's no way that's possible. Yeah, there's no way that's possible. What's really going on here, man? A lot. Look, you don't have to believe me. That's fine. I just need you to help me figure out where this stuff comes from. Are there serial numbers? Can you trace the manufacturers? Find who did the construction. Can you give me anything? I mean, not really. I'm a contractor. I'm not the FBI. If this was a very recent job, maybe I could see about finding the records. But this was not a recent job. I guess it was remodeled in the 90s, but never finished. Originally built. Who knows? I can tell you it's probably local stuff. Your insulation. These fiberglass bats, they're the ones we use a lot. This kind of boiler is common for this area and this climate. Rare to see one of these elsewhere. Seems to be the old standard model they used in the 90s and early 2000s. That's what I got for you. I sighed with resignation. All right, well, that's not nothing. Oh. One more thing. Yeah. That ticking noise. Do you have any idea what's making it? Martin's face scrunched in confusion again. I just thought you had a grandfather clock upstairs or something. Martin left shortly after. There was a trepidation in all of his interactions thereafter which I couldn't blame him for. Surely he didn't believe my story, and he was trying to figure out what the point of it all was. As was I. What I said to him was true. It wasn't nothing. One small piece of the puzzle is better than none. The basement was likely built with local stuff, and it was likely built long became my basement. I had suspicions before, but now they were confirmed. This was the basement of a different house, somehow moved in place of mine. This left me with one ultimate burning question. Whose basement was it before? So, whose basement was it before? Maddie asked, after I explained what Martin found and my hypothesis. My thoughts exactly. I responded, well, I guess that's what we have to find out. Then we can find out how it's here, she said. I could tell from her voice that she was completely involved and completely invested. It almost felt too easy to get her on board like this. How are we supposed to do that? How can an empty basement tell us who lived there? I posed. Maybe it can't, but maybe those things you've been seeing and hearing can. I thought it just as she said it, and it all came to me in a rush. The names. I muttered to myself. The what? The what? Names. I've been hearing voices and some of the voices have said names. First names, but maybe they're part of this. Can we use that somehow? Search up those names and we know they're probably local, so those names plus our area and see if something comes up. Okay? Sure, we can try, Maddie said hesitantly. Wes, we can try it though. You do though, you're better at that shit than me. Okay, what are the names? Maddie asked as she pulled out her phone. Jackson, no. Jacob and Kayla Bob. That's it. Those are pretty common names, Dad. Yeah, I know, but both together. That narrows it down. I feel like it probably won't, Maddie said doubtfully as she scrolled. I just typed it in and nothing is jumping out at me. Really? Shit. The internet isn't a miracle worker, Dad. I thought harder about the names. I thought about the voices. I thought about the cadence of them. There's more, I said. More. It's not just the names, it's how they were said. I began to put the pieces together. They weren't spoken to me. None of the voices spoke to me. They were just speaking, and I was overhearing it. Echoes of conversations they've already had. That's what they feel like. And the way the names were said, how were they said? Jacob, it was like shock, confusion, fear, like the person had been caught or snuck up on. Caleb, though, that was different. They were screaming his name, crying, just wailing. I contemplated for another moment before coming to my shaky conclusion. Caleb is dead. Caleb was killed. And the wailing voice, it was woman's voice. She was so broken. It had to be his mother, which makes Caleb a child. Maybe the child I've been hearing. Maybe someone killed that child. Maybe it was in that basement. Maddie interrupted, concern in her voice. Wait. The child. All he says is daddy. Why is that all he says? The way he says it, he's surprised. He's confused. Why would he be confused to see his dad? What is his dad doing that confuses him? Dad, you're freaking me out.
Dad,
I'm sorry, Maddie. I'm sorry. But I think I'm starting to get it. Why do they only say one thing? Why do they repeat one word or phrase over and over? People always say ghosts are trapped. They're doomed to relive their final moments. That's always the thing with ghosts. That's what ghosts are. The last vestiges of us, the last memories, played on a loop. All of these words, Maddie, they're final words. They're the last thing these people said before they died. And the last thing the child said was daddy. Don't you see? People died in that basement. People were killed in that basement. That's what you have to look for. Maddie looked at me, incredulous and frightened. Okay, Dad, I'll look. Do you believe me? I asked. I don't know what to believe. But I want to figure this out too, so I'll look into everything tonight. Thank you, Mads. Yeah, just try and take it easy, okay? She was right, as always. I was a mess. I was strung out. This whole thing was beginning to consume me. We didn't talk about anything else. I didn't ask her how school was. I didn't ask about her day. I didn't ask about her friends. But then again, I rarely did ask, and she never really told me anyways. There always seemed to be something else in the way. What came first, her not telling, or me not asking? I used to say I love you, every day before school and before bed too. But then she got older, and she stopped saying it back. That kind of direct affection started making her feel awkward, so I stopped saying it as much too. Should I have kept saying it? I don't know. She was okay, though. I knew she was. She was so strong. She didn't even need me around. I needed her more than she needed me. That was the problem. I played with Sammy for a while. I tried to delicately broach the subject of the basement, the TV, and the sharp man to him, but he was disinterested in talking about it. I wondered why. As the sun began to set, I didn't feel at ease per se, but I felt a bit more at ease than I had been previously. The answers I got, or at least the ones I surmised, told me a lot. If these were just spirits caught in their final moments, then there was no malice. We weren't targeted by some kind of tangible evil. We were merely the subject of some extra-dimensional anomaly. I thought about every encounter to this point, looking beyond the fear I felt, straight to the facts. The fact is they never did anything to harm us. Not that I could see. Maybe nothing was out to get us, and these things just wanted to talk. They wanted their stories told. They probably wanted closure. Their voices were seared onto my brain, and I felt bad for them. There was so much pain in them. I couldn't imagine what it must be like to be stuck like that. All traces of who you used to be reduced to a few words. No love, no memory, no past, no future. Just a broken record of the scariest moment of your life. Maybe if I could give them that closure. Maybe that's how this ends. A plan began to formulate in my head. I wanted to communicate with them properly. I'd been avoiding them all this time, when maybe all I had to do was listen. Sammy was already out like a light. I couldn't leave him alone, which meant I had to tell Maddie. I hoisted his body up from his bed and carried him over to Maddie's door. I need to drop Dummy off here for a little bit.
All right. What are you doing?
Maddie asked. I'm going to try to talk to them. I responded, dropping Sammy on her bed. Maddie's eyes widened. What do you mean? Who? The fucking. I answered while vaguely gesturing with my hand. Ghosts. Or whatever they are, I added. Oh, Maddie's expression dropped slightly. Her tone was slightly off in a way that I didn't know how to acknowledge. Yeah, I think I know how to communicate with them. If I can find out what they want, maybe I can help them. You want to help them? Yeah, then maybe they'll leave. I don't think they mean us harm. Are you sure about that? Maddie asked, with a deep twist of unease beneath her voice. One I was unaccustomed to, I had the chance to lie, to employ the dad bravado. I chose not to this time. No, I'm not sure of anything. This just feels like what I have to do. Okay, well, I'm coming. Coming then, Maddie asserted. No, absolutely not. I need to stay with Sam. I think we should all stay together, Maddie said, almost pleading. Matt, is everything okay? I'm fine. I could see it behind her eyes clear as day. She was afraid. I began to suspect that it wasn't just from what I had been telling her. You believed me, I began to theorize. When I started talking about voices and ghosts and shit, you played skeptical at first, but you went along with it pretty quickly. Maddie shook her head and her hands began to fidget with the items on her desk. You've seen things, haven't you? I prodded. No. I haven't seen anything like you have. Then why did you believe me? Maddie sighed. I believed you when you told me about the sharp man. What? Why? Because I know what that means. Once again, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. My mind raced and I struggled to get more words out. What are you talking about? You weren't here, you were at work. I was watching Sammy. This was maybe 2 years ago. He was running around like an asshole. You know how he was. I nodded. Somehow, and I don't know how, he gets a hold of a steak knife. What? I yelled. This is why I didn't tell you. Anyways, he's running around with this knife. I try to grab it from him before he fucking dies, and he accidentally slices my hand. But he doesn't know what the hell anything means. He's laughing. I get the knife from him and I just point at it and yell, "I sharp." And then I point at the cut on my hand and yell. Again and again. Trying to, create word association. I was panicking. But ever since then, every time he sees a cut or a scar, he points it and says, "Sharp dot." TXY, he does that. Yeah, that's why. And I haven't seen any of these things like you have. Not while I'm awake. But for the past 5 nights in a row, I've had a dream about a man with cuts all over his face and a giant split down the middle of his head. I had no idea what to say. My mental image of this man she described was instantly horrific. Maddie continued, so. I don't know if I can believe that these things don't mean us harm. Maybe they are just lost souls, like you said, repeating their final moments. But if that's true, I don't want to know what that thing's final moments were. And I really don't want to know why he was smiling. Jesus, Maddie. I don't think you should try to talk to them, Dad. I know, but I have to figure this out. This is all the more reason to do it. They're talking to me regardless. I just need to be able to hear them better. We're so close. If we get 1 or 2 more names, maybe we can put it all together. That's all we need. I saw Maddie's expression of disapproval and fear, so I came up with a compromise. Okay, here's what you can do. You can stay at the top of the stairs while I go down. That way you got one eye on the kid, and I can shout if I need anything. All right, we won't be apart. Maddie relented. Okay. The plan was simple enough. The voices came through best on the old TV. I figured that the signal would be stronger if I put the TV in the epicenter of this whole thing. I made my way briskly through the house. I could hear the wind begin to whistle through the walls. Through the living room window, I could see the snow starting to pick up, but I didn't have time to fret about that now. I grabbed an extension cord and plugged it in on an upstairs outlet before throwing the rest down into the abyss. Then I took a desk lamp from the living room, brought it down, connected it, and set it on the concrete floor, illuminating a small patch at the staircase's end. Finally, I hauled my big, fat CRT down the stairs. I sat it dead in the center of the big empty space and plugged it in as well. Maddie tossed the flashlight down afterwards, and I was ready to begin. I sat cross-legged in front of the small, dark screen. Neither the light from the lamp nor the small amount coming in from the door was enough to reach all the dark corners of the basement. Though I could see just well enough to notice that my breath was visible, I switched the TV on and was faced with the familiar static and the loud, crackling hiss that accompanied it, more than loud enough to drown out the old familiar tick-tock. The more my eyes adjusted to the blinding white light, the more the rest of the room cascaded into darkness. Was this a bad idea? Was I doing the right thing? I didn't know. All I knew was that I was terrified. "Tell me who you are," I requested softly. "Tell me why you're here." I attuned myself to the static. I gave in to its hypnotic effects, hoping that bringing the TV down here would increase the connection to whatever it was. The first few minutes yielded nothing, but I was patient, determined. "Daddy." The familiar child's voice broke through the static. My body shook to attention. "Caleb, is that your name?" I called out, still attempting to speak softly. "Daddy," it repeated. "What happened to you, Caleb?" I asked, allowing more urgency to enter my tone. "Daddy. Where is your daddy? What did he do?" "Daddy," I sighed. He didn't seem able to say anything else. I didn't even know if he could hear me or understand me. Maybe this wasn't going to be a conversation. Maybe it was just a broken record after all. "I'm sorry." The solemn voice from before echoed through the static, and the other voices slowly came with it. Every minute or so, one would come through. I listened intently to see if there was any more clarity. "No, I don't want to." "Jacob, Daddy, Caleb, the house." I remember. "Why am I here?" All phrases I've heard before, but thinking of them as the final words of these poor souls stuck out of time cast a deep feeling of dread over me. I wonder who these people were. What their lives were like. What happened to them? Which of these words belonged to the sharp man? "Can't see." "Wait." That was a new one. "Even without you." A different new voice. Quater and barely perceptible. "Not you, the other one." "Help." A blood-curdling feminine scream broke through the static, sending a jolt through my body. Always wins. I wasn't supposed to be like this. The voices began to get louder and more frequent, like they were trying to break through. Every minute became every 10 seconds, became every second, voices looping and layering atop one another, noise on top of noise. "I don't want to." "I'm sorry," always wins. "Make it stop." "The other one." Jacob. "They are his." "Can't see." "Brooke." "Darren." "I'm sorry." "Mimes always wins. Always wins." The house always wins." Maddie's voice startled me from the toys, startled me from the top of the staircase. "Daddy." "Brooke." "Nandi. Even without you." "Rook." "The are you." "Tear." "Steer." I wanted to turn away from the TV to respond, but I had to keep listening. "Daddy. Even without you." "Make it stop." "Other one." "Not you." "Thee are his." "Thee are his." "Without you." "Thee are his." "Thee are." "Without you." "Dad." "Get up here," Maddie pleaded. I heard her. I heard the urgency in her voice. I wanted to move, but I was transfixed. I couldn't take my eyes away. Just a little more. "Don't want." "To be." "Here." "Don't." "Be." "Daddy." "D'other." "Not." "Daddy." "Mech." "Other." "Nother." A hand grabbed me violently by the arm and I jolted out of my daze. It was Maddie. "We have to go," she shouted. I slowly stood up. My eyes were stinging worse than ever. "What's happening?" I asked frantically. "It's Sammy. It's..." She trailed off as she slowly looked towards the screen. Her eyes widened. "What?" "Maddie, what? What happened?" I shouted, trying to get her attention back, but she just stared towards the snow. "Oh my God. I hear them all." Maddie whispered. Tears began forming in her eyes. "Maddie, the house always wins." Maddie said curiously, trying to discern the words. "I'm sorry. You are his..." "The other one." "Maddie," I shouted again, pulling her shoulders away and turning her to face me. "What happened to Sammy?" After a moment, I saw her consciousness come back online, and she answered with tears flowing down her cheeks. "The sharp man." I rushed up the stairs to the sounds of Sammy screaming in horror. I darted down the hallway towards it, and when I stood in the doorway to Maddie's room, I saw him. He was laid out on the bed, screaming and convulsing. I don't know what happened. He was sleeping and then... Maddie explained through tears. Sam. I yelled as I made my way to the bedside. I saw that his eyes were closed. I held his body down to the bed to stop the violent thrashing. His screams pierced through me. "Asarp! Asarp!" he screamed. "It's okay. Sammy, you're dreaming," I shouted, but the screams continued. He wouldn't stop shaking and flailing in my arms. "What do we do?" Maddie yelled through the chaos. Thinking quickly, I instructed Maddie, "Get the book." "What book?" "The dragon one. The one he likes. The one that you always put him to sleep with." The Maddie quickly ran out of the room and returned a few seconds later holding the children's book. "Come here. Read it to him." Maddie knelt down beside me, opened the book to a random page, and began reading softly into his ear. The dragon's belly gurgled. "So hungry," he snapped. "Why must I be confined to this awful trap?" He looked for a way, any way to be freed, so he could continue his insatiable greed. I felt Sammy's body begin to tire and his screams began to soften. It was working. The brave knight entered, not keen to be a meal. But to his surprise, the dragon offered a deal. "Set me free now. Let me soar in the skies. In return, knight, I shall give you a prize." The knight knew better. He knew it was a jape. There was no way he could let the dragon escape. His breathing began to regulate. Pretty soon he was completely calm. Maddie and I both let out a huge sigh of relief. Sammy's eyes slowly began to open. "Thank God," Maddie said under her breath. "Maddie." Sam yelled, wrapping his arms around her and crying into her shoulder. I wrapped my arms around both of them. "Don't want the sharp man to take me. Please don't let him take me," Sammy cried. "You just had a bad dream, kid. It's okay," Maddie said in her most soothing voice. Maddie looked towards me and I saw everything she wanted to say written in her pleading expression. She wanted us to leave. "We're going to go to a motel for the night, okay?" I said to the both of them. Then I added directly to Maddie, "We'll figure it out from there." She nodded. I walked into my room to begin preparing an overnight bag, but then I looked out the window. I walked over to the living room window to get a better view of the driveway, and that confirmed it. We were snowed in, and it was still coming down hard. It would take all night to clear the driveway, and even then the roads likely wouldn't be plowed until much later. We were stuck. Maddie and Sammy joined me in the living room. They both saw what I saw. Maddie's expression instantly dropped. "Okay," I said, formulating a new plan. I turned to Sammy. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a slumber party here in the living room. The three of us." "Duh, I can stay up," Sammy asked. "You can stay up. You can sleep. You can do whatever you want because there's no school tomorrow. We'll bring your bed out here and your favorite toys. Until the snow goes away, we're all going to stay in the living room." I turned to Maddie. "Sound good?" Maddie nodded again. Sammy cheered. I began getting to work setting the living room up for us, while also grabbing the TV out of the basement so I could shut and barricade the door with the chair once again. Unsure of how much it would help at this point, but just one extra measure. Sammy didn't want to go back to sleep for the first couple hours, so we played some games and put on a movie. We had a full-on Connect 4 tournament that we let him win. It was fun. It had been so long since we all had fun together like this. I couldn't figure out why I didn't make this happen more often. There was just always something else in the way. Eventually he passed out again. Maddie and I watched over him in the dim lamplight. "Should we take turns sleeping?" Maddie asked. "Yeah, that's probably the move." A few moments of silence followed between us before a question formed in my head. "Those dreams you had about that guy, what exactly happened in them? Was there anything else?" Maddie paused before answering. "Yeah, they were strange. I didn't think much about them at the time." She shifted in her seat. "They start with me walking through the house at night. Then I come to a door in the hallway. I can't tell which door, but when I open it, it's just blackness. The floor is made of fog, and it goes on forever. Then someone takes my hand. I look up, and it's him. He's wearing this elegant suit, this tuxedo. But he has cuts all over his face, bleeding from every one. I can almost see his skull through the giant gash down the middle of his head. I'm scaling, but then what? Then, suddenly I'm in this fancy white dress. He brings me in and we start dancing. slow dancing in this void. I don't want to, but my body moves anyway. I feel the blood from his face trickle down mine. And there's this echo. It's like people singing in an opera, but it's so far away. We dance to it, and suddenly I'm happy. I don't know why, but I am. Then I turn around and, well, I see Mom. Your mom is there.
Yeah.
She's standing there watching us dance. Then she holds her arms open and I start walking towards her. Then I wake up. Wow. That's a lot. Yeah, I don't know what it means. If it means anything. I sit back and shrug, letting the silence fill the space. I didn't know if I should pry into her feelings about her mother. Do you still hate her? Maddie asked. I was taken aback. She never asked anything like that before. No, I've never hated her, I answered honestly. That answer seemed to be enough for her. She decided not to follow up. It was the truth. I didn't hate her for leaving us. She tried. She did. But those last few months after Sammy was born, I knew she was gone. I knew one night I'd wake up and she wouldn't be there. I even heard her get up in the middle of the night and pack her things. And I didn't stop her. I figured it would be better let her go than to force her to stay. All right, I said, leaning over, grabbing my laptop and handing it to Maddie. You got work to do. Right? Yeah, let's do it. I got more names. Good, okay. Maddie commented while opening and preparing the laptop. Go. Darren and Brooke. Caleb, Jacob, Darren, and Brooke. I listed. And make sure you add some keywords like tragedy or murder. Oh, and the location, because the house is probably local, Bob. Yeah, I got it, Maddie said, already typing. I let her have at it, as I diverted my attention between her and Sammy. He was still out. No signs of a nightmare or anything else. I listened as the wind outside ravaged, and it filled me with a dark feeling. Until now, leaving had been an option. Until now, if worse came to worse, I could at least gather them up in the car and drive away someplace. Until now. I checked the clock. To my surprise, it was only a little after midnight. I had hoped it was later. The thought of 8 more hours of darkness was deeply distressing. Dad. Maddie called out after about 15-20 minutes of sleuthing. Yeah, I think I got something. I was instantly alert. Really? I asked. Maddie began to pass me the laptop. Read this. I sat it on my lap and my eyes adjusted to the screen. I was faced with an older-looking website. It featured a sky blue background with basic black Times New Roman text that was only a little hard to read. At the top, a banner written in word art which read, Maritime Mysteries, along with a few clip art images of boat helms and anchors. Below it, the title of the article, which I read out loud. Ashbrook House in Nova Scotia's Murder Manor sounds promising, I muttered. Keep reading. Maddie insisted. It was clunky and unprofessional looking, but oddly that made me trust it. This was clearly a passion project. I began silently reading the unformatted wall of text. Throughout history, there have been places that seem to attract tragedy. The Cecil Hotel, Akakara Forest, Hawthorne Woods, but there is another location, dear readers, that not many know about, and it lives. Right under our noses. Good enough start. The next few paragraphs seemed like fluff, so I skimmed over them and dug into the meat of the article. The first tragic event on record would occur shortly after the house's construction in 1956, when the first owner, a 58-year-old woman named Catherine McKinstray, suffered a brain aneurysm in the house's basement and died. Less than 2 years later, 46-year-old Brent O'Malley would also perish in the very same spot due to a carbon monoxide leak. Only 1 year after that, 27-year-old Julia Fairview would die by falling down the basement stairs. In the eyes of many, this solidified the house's reputation as cursed. Further owners would even talk of seeing the ghosts of those departed roaming around the house. I gave Maddie an unsure glance, and she returned it with one of absolute certainty. Her eyes simply said, keep fucking reading. So I did. The tragedies did not end with accidents, however, as on September 9th, 1963, a man by the name of Letterier brutally murdered his son Caleb. That name smacked me in the face. I was right. The child was Caleb. The child was murdered by this father, I continued, and wife Joan with an axe. When officers arrived on the scene after a neighbor's 911 call, they would find Bill covered in blood with cuts all over his person, determined to have been caused by shards of a broken bathroom mirror. Whether from a struggle or self-inflicted, nobody knows. Bill would chillingly utter the words, "The house always wins," before slamming his own face into the sharp edge of his axe until dead. The bodies of Caleb and Joan were found in the basement. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. This was it. Ashbrook House was the place. Caleb was the child. Bill Leterrier was the sharp man. Maddie did it. We have our lead. I decided to read on. From that event onwards, talk of the house's curse spiked. Reports of paranormal incidents would skyrocket. Many future owners would flee the house with little explanation. Curiously, beyond the events that took place within the house was also home to multiple individuals who would go on to commit terrible crimes elsewhere. Darren Barbeau, Jacob Lightbody, and Fraser Kane had all stayed in Ashbrook House at one point or another in their youth. Whether they had committed any of their crimes inside the house is unknown. Those names each had their own hyperlinks. I could only imagine what I would learn if I clicked them, but I had no desire to go down more rabbit holes at the moment. I got the picture, part of it anyway. "That's it, isn't it?" Maddie asked, seeing that I had finished reading. "That's it. Holy shit, that's it." I responded. "See if you can find the address," I added, passing the laptop back. As cathartic as it to finally solve this crucial piece of the puzzle, it did leave me with two new burning questions that I chose not to share. Number one, there were only 5 deaths mentioned in that article, so where did the rest of the voices come from? Number two is, why? Why did Bill Leterrier kill his family? Why did multiple murderers live in that house? Why did he say, "The house always wins"? Is there something else in that house? Something even worse than the sharp man himself? Shit, Maddie said, taking me out of my mental wandering. She began to read aloud from the screen. "It. The address of Ashbrook House has been removed at the request of the house's current owner, David Wyatt. We have agreed to respect their privacy and urge all others to do the same." Shit. Wait, so someone lives there right now? I asked. Apparently. It's interesting, might have to talk to that David Wyatt then. "I'll work on that. Thanks, Mads," I said, standing up from the couch. "Just going to the bathroom quick. Watch the kid." I was dreading this inevitable trip. Leaving the relative safety of the open living room, I'm going down that dark hallway, past that damn door. I resolved to be as quick as possible. I walked briskly down the hall into the bathroom, feeling somewhat safe in the bright light. My mind anticipated something to happen, but I was able to finish up quickly. I washed my hands, but over the sound of the running water, I heard the faintest little clink. Then a tiny sliver of glass fell from the mirror past my hands into the sink. I remembered this, but what did it mean? I looked up to see where it came from and I screamed. Staring back at me from the mirror wasn't my own face. I knew exactly whose face it was. Blood pooled in his toothy smile as it cascaded down from a multitude of long, deep cuts. He had long, patchy, wispy hair that looked like he had tore most of it out. His skin pulled and twisted to the whim of the slits in his flesh, creating unnatural curvatures. One of his eyelids was severed completely, to split down the middle of his face. That enormous gash from the axe he had turned on himself. It went so deep it was like a cavern. I turned to run out of the bathroom, but the door was stuck. I pulled and I pulled, until I heard a loud, shattering crash behind me. I looked back, and the mirror was broken into a million pieces, and the sharp man was gone. I screamed again as I pounded and tugged on the door. I heard commotion on the other side. "Dad." Maddie shouted. I felt her pulling at the door from the other side. I looked back once more and the shatter marks began to bleed. But then the door finally gave way and I nearly crashed into Maddie. "Fuck," I shouted. Jesus fucking Christ. What happened? I ignored her question and grabbed her arm to run her back to the living room. "Wait," she exclaimed. "Where's Sammy?" My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, where's Sammy?" I didn't want to leave him alone in the living room, so I woke him up and brought him with me. He was right beside me. I was holding on to him. No. Shit. I uttered, panicking. I instantly walked to the basement door. The chair was still propped up in front of it, but that didn't deter me from thinking he somehow got down there. That was still the most likely option. But how? How did he get down there so fast? Check the living room, check the bedrooms. I'm going down. I instructed. Yell everywhere you go. Yell so I can hear. Okay, Dad. Be careful, Doc. She pleaded. I moved the chair and opened the door. I was smart enough to keep the flashlight on me this time. I briskly walked down the cavernous basement steps. Same. I screamed, pointing the flashlight in all directions. The damn ticking sound made its presence heard. He's not in the living room. Maddie yelled, just loud enough for me to hear. I moved the flashlight around every inch, but I saw nothing. He had to be here, I thought. This always the place. Where else would he be? He's not in my room. Maddie yelled down once again. Say, I repeated to no avail. Daddy, Maddie screamed. Her voice was full of horror. My heart sank and I ran back up the stairs. I looked to my right and saw Maddie standing outside the door to Sammy's room. What is it? Tears were streaming down Maddie's face as she merely pointed into the room. I ran over and looked inside. The window was wide open. The next 5 minutes were a whirlwind. Sammy was nowhere to be found. His bedroom window, which had been locked, was now wide open and blowing snow inside. Maddie was crying. But we weren't without hope. All of that snow had in this moment been a godsend. I could see his tracks through the window go into the woods behind our house. But I didn't have much time. He couldn't survive out there for long. Call the police and wait here. I instructed Maddie while I quickly flung my winter coat on. Without hesitation, I saw her wipe her tears away and get her phone out. I slid on my winter boots, grabbed the flashlight, and ran out the front door before I could hear her make the call. I made my way around the side of the house to Sammy's window and began to follow the child-sized boot prints. I sprinted after them, shouting Sammy's name over and over again. The snow was beginning to come down even harder, and the wind was blowing fast. The tracks still looked fresh, but it wouldn't be long before they were covered. The tracks didn't seem to end. He must have been running too. Running from what? I looked back, and I couldn't see the light of my house anymore, nor the light of anything, except my flashlight against the blanket of white. The jacket and boots didn't offer as much protection from the elements as I had hoped. Nights like this required so much more. The cold was biting hard. I must have been running for 20 minutes, only ever briefly stopping for a breath, desperate to catch up to the poor boy who must have been freezing. I couldn't bear the thought. Maddie said he was right beside her, so he couldn't have gotten his coat before he climbed out of that window. He snuck out into the snow in his damn pajamas. Didn't even have his boots. I stopped, looking at the tracks before me. Small boots. Definitely boots. This wasn't me, so whose tracks were these? The child, Caleb. But why? I pondered, the words spinning in my head like a washing machine. But then it hit. To get me away from the house. It was a trick. Fuck. I left Maddie alone in that goddamn house. I turned back around and ran once again, hoping that the tracks would remain long enough to find my way home. I wanted to run faster, but I could only trudge. The snow got heavier and heavier. The wind nearly knocked me on my ass. This wasn't just heavy snow anymore. This was a blizzard. A bad one. My face began to sting and my extremities started going numb. The relentless wind fought me every step. The snow felt like needles against my skin. I was wholly unprepared. I began doing the math. I ran nonstop for about 20 minutes. At the rate I was moving now, it was going to take at least twice as long to get back. That is, if it didn't get worse and if I didn't get lost. Unfortunately, both of those things happened. The snow reached my knees, and it showed no signs of slowing. The tracks were gone. I was running out of time. I felt like I was going to die, and it was becoming a scarily real possibility. Is this what they wanted? Had they all been plotting this? Even the child. All of their jumbled up words and phrases replayed in my mind. I hadn't had a chance to try and make sense of them. They wanted so desperately to communicate with me. They were trying to warn me. Why would they warn me if they wanted to kill me? That didn't add up. It must have been something else. I trudged further and further. I couldn't feel my face anymore, and my legs desperately wanted to give out, but I couldn't allow them to. What were they warning me of? What were they trying to tell me? I was missing something itching at the back of my mind. What was it? What did I miss? The house always wins. Were they all part of the house? Did it have some power over them? Were they not in control? My body was shutting down. My hand couldn't grasp the flashlight anymore. It just slipped from my fingers and buried into the snow. I stuffed my numb hand into my jacket pocket, hoping to give it some chance at regaining feeling, but the damage was done. My toes were gone too. The snow no longer melted when it hit my face. It just stuck there. Everything was slowing down to a crawl. It took a monumental effort to even remain upright. It took almost as much effort to keep my eyes open in the constant barrage of snow hitting me like a shotgun. Just don't stop moving. I thought to myself, if you stop, you die. But it was so hard now. Was I even close to being home? Once I got home, what could I do in this state? What could I possibly do if Maddie was in danger? Maddie, I failed her. Not just today, but so many times. I put Sammy first. I put him first because he needed me more. But they both needed me. They both needed more than me. Somewhere in the second hour, I collapsed. My feet gave way and I dropped to my knees. My numb hands plunged into the snow. I couldn't get up. I physically couldn't. But I couldn't stop either. I had to keep moving. So I crawled. I finally closed my eyes. I didn't suppose it mattered much to be able to see anymore. When they shut, I saw Maddie. She was 12 years old, peering at me from the bathroom door. I knew exactly what memory this was. I hated this memory. Maddie was always a bit of a handful as a kid. The preteen years were pretty ugly, especially after her mom left. How do you explain that? How could I possibly fill that void? She blamed me for Steph leaving. She told me constantly that she was going to go live with her. That one day she was going to come pick her up. Every day that didn't happen, she resented me even more. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't be her mother. I couldn't be what she needed me to be, especially since I had a screaming 9-month-old baby that I had to make not die on top of all that. But I'm a parent, so that's what you do. You push it down, and you do the impossible. But above all, you never let them see the damage. But I wasn't good enough. I wasn't strong enough. There was this one day. This one damn day, I just ran out of steam. I sat on the floor of the bathroom with this screaming infant in my arms. I can't even remember what it was that set me over the edge, but it all came to the surface and I broke down. I cried and I sobbed and I wailed. It was too much. It was too hard. I couldn't do it. Then I saw her face, peeking in the bathroom door, staring at me. I'll never forget the look on her face, the look in her eyes. She was never supposed to see me like that. From that moment on, she never complained again. She never acted out. She never yelled. She started helping out around the house. She started helping take care of Sammy, and it was great. I was so proud of her. All it cost was her childhood. I failed her that day. I let her see the damage. And then I failed her every single day since by accepting all her help. It was selfish. If I was a better dad, she wouldn't have to sacrifice so much. She could still be a kid. But I took that from her. I forced her to grow up because I wasn't good enough. Because I couldn't hack it. Every day I wish she would just ask me for something. One thing, one favor. Ask me for help. I wish she would be difficult or be angry. Nag me for things like she used to. Disobey, get into mischief. That's what kids are supposed to do. But that part of her died because of me. Now I've exposed her to this too. I brought her in and made her a part of this. Because I still couldn't hack it. I was dying. I knew it. I failed again. But I felt something under my arm. An edge, leading to something hard but smoother than the ground. It creaked as I put weight on it. I managed to force my eyes open to make sure I wasn't mistaken. The steps leading up to the porch. I made it. I actually made it. It took every bit of energy I had left to hoist myself up the stairs. Even more to reach the doorknob and somehow open it without use of my fingers, but I managed. The door swung open with my limp body against it, and I collapsed into the safety of my home. From the floor, I kicked the door closed behind me, and then I laid, waiting for the warmth to reach me. It took forever for me to even begin feeling again. In the meantime, I mustered up the lung power to shout, "Maddie." No answer, no cops either. What happened? Did she not call? Could they just not reach us in this weather? Maddie, still nothing. What have I done? Maddie, Sam, where are you? I shouted, my voice cracking and stumbling with every word. The house was quiet. The only sound was the whistling of the gale force outside and the creaks of the structure struggling to withstand it. I crawled through the living room, down the long hallway, and into the bathroom. I crawled through the broken glass of the mirror and climbed into the tub, letting the shower head rain warm water upon me. The warmth gradually enveloped me and pierced through the numbness. My fingers and toes began to move again. I was elated that they weren't gone for good, but that didn't stop the tears from flowing. Just like that night all those years ago, I broke. How could I not? Both of their faces tormented my thoughts. They trusted me, and I let them both down. I gave myself until my muscles came back online to indulge in my breakdown. Then I had to stuff it all back deep inside and fix it. The strength in my legs took longer to come back, but eventually I could stand unaided. I exited the bathroom in my dripping wet clothes and immediately headed for the basement. I didn't know what my plan was, but down there was my only bet. I flung the door open, which took more effort than I was expecting. I was still far too weak. I looked down into the abyss. Pitch black. My flashlight was buried. I had no way of seeing, but I went down anyway. Step after step, my senses heightened. I didn't know what I hoped to find. I tripped on the last step and fell on my face against the cold concrete. A dull pain shot through me. Fuck! I exclaimed out loud. I miscounted the steps. Or did I? I got up to my feet and lurched forward, only to trip once again. Some object in my way. It sounded like a bag. I moved my hands around the space and connected with more random objects. Plastic, fabric, cardboard. Nope, I thought. It can't be. I shuffled back towards the steps and felt along the wall for the light switch. The light switch that hadn't worked ever since the basement changed. I found the switch and flicked it on, and my suspicions were proven correct. The light came on. The basement was ours. All of our stuff was back, all of our clutter. Everything was back in its rightful place once again. The steps had the correct number. Even that feeling, that deep foreboding, that inexplicable dread was gone. My hope. It took with it my hope. What could I do now? What happened? Where were they? I ran back up the stairs. I paced around the entire house, looking for something, anything. I screamed. You went. I shouted over and over into the air. I picked up the landline and shouted into it, praying that the voices would call out to me again, but I was only met with a dial tone. I threw the phone to the floor, and then I collapsed in a heap. My head throbbed. The snow had begun to ease, but it would still be a while before driving would be possible. Even if I knew where they were, I couldn't get there. The thought of being stuck in this house while my kids were all alone with whatever it was made me want to scream. The utter silence felt like a sadistic taunt, a constant reminder of my failure, my powerlessness. I wanted to just curl up and die. I wanted this all to be over somehow. I couldn't deal with this. All the thoughts of what could be happening to my children, I couldn't bear it. But one little voice remained. The same little voice that told me, just don't stop moving. And it was saying the exact same thing now. That little voice saved me, and now I needed it to save them. Keep moving, don't stop. If you stop, they die. It doesn't matter if it's impossible. That's what you do when you're a parent. You hurt. You cry. You reach your limit, you go insane, and then you do it. I didn't have a logical reason for why I knew my children would be at that house. But none of this had been logical from the start. The room went back to where it came from, and it took them with it. That was my conclusion. I opened my laptop and saw the unfinished search Maddie has begun on David Wyatt, the current owner of Ashbrook House. I had to find him. There was no way he could live in that house and not know something. David Wyatt, I need to talk to you about Ashbrook House. It's urgent. Please respond. I typed, then copied and pasted into the messages of every profile with that name on every social network I knew of. Then I got out the phone book and began making calls. It only took about 2 hours for me to get a favorable response. Facebook does have its uses after all. I have nothing to say about Ashbrook House. Please respect my privacy. The message read, I typed back with haste, it's an emergency. My kids are in danger. Please call me so I can explain. Then I left my cell phone number. About a minute later, I received a call. Who are you? What happened? A stern, gravelly voice asked through the receiver. I wasn't sure how to start. I wanted to explain everything from the beginning, but I didn't want to waste time or lose his attention. How could I explain this when I don't even know what's happening? My name is Adam, and I think my kids might be in your basement." I cringed. That sounded so odd to say.
What?
The voice replied, clearly dumbfounded. I sighed. "Look, I know you know something's wrong with your house. You wouldn't have picked up the phone if you didn't. I don't know how to say this except that your house has been tormenting my family. My kids are gone. I think it took them. I need your address. I need your help." "No," he exclaimed. "God damn it. Why were your kids trespassing on my property? How did they get in?" "They weren't. We've never been near your house, any of us. One day our basement changed. It wasn't our basement anymore. I have reason to believe it was yours. I don't know why. But one day, I opened the door to a room that wasn't mine, and something else came with it. It took them, and now it's gone. I need to find them." The other end went silent for a moment, but I couldn't spare that moment, so I continued. "I'm completely snowed in, so it might take an hour or two for me to get there. Can you at least look for them? Can we get the cops involved? I've never stepped foot in that house, Adam," David explained. "What?" "I bought that house to let it rot. I've never been inside. I will never go inside or allow anyone else to go inside." His words chilled me to the core, but I had to remain stoic. "Okay, so you know how dangerous it is. My kids are in there. Let me call the police." "No police." Why not?" "Thea will have to break the locks to get inside. The locks mustn't be broken." "What does that matter?" "I'll pay for your locks." "The locks mustn't be broken," he reasserted. I didn't understand what he meant or why that was so important, but I believed the intent behind his words, and I knew he would not budge. "Then I'll go. You tell me how to get inside without breaking the locks." "Adam, I strongly advise you to stay away from it. It's not what you think it is." "I don't care. I don't have a choice. You have to see that. Those articles you probably read online, they didn't tell you everything. If you go in there..." "Do you have kids, David?" I cut him off. "I do." "Then you know I have to get in that house. I'm not going to stop. I can find your address some other way. There will be other records. And if you don't tell me how to get inside, I'll break your locks. I have to get them back." Another minute of silence on the other end. This time I let the silence sit. "I've messaged you the address. Do what you think you have to do. Thank you, David." I really thought it was over. I thought I had starved it. David muttered in a more melancholic voice. I didn't really expect him to divulge more. "What is it that's inside Ashbrook? What else do you know?" I prodded. I needed to know everything I could. "The articles talk about the deaths that occur in the house. The murders. The accidents. They don't tell you about what happened outside the house." I heard a deep sigh from the other end and a throat clearing. "My daughter lived in Ashbrook. About a week in her staying there, she told me she thought it was haunted. She didn't take it seriously, and neither did I. 2 more weeks and she left the house. She showed up at my door crying. I didn't really believe her stories, but I knew she wouldn't lie. She wasn't like that. I let her stay with me until we figured it out." He paused and I heard shuffling on his end. He seemed to be trying to make himself more comfortable to tell this story. "She never went back to that house again. We both thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. She changed. I saw it every day she stayed with me. She was never the same. My daughter was incredibly gifted. Such a strong head on her shoulders and smart. So much smarter than me. She was a nurse, for God's sake. The girl that came back from that house. Something was missing and it only got worse. I had her see shrinks, all kinds of doctors. She got pills, nothing helped. Every day she was less." "I'm so sorry," I interjected solemnly. David ignored my comment and continued, determined to make his point. "I wake up one night and go check on her and she was gone, dead. Slumped over her desk. She left a note and I couldn't even read her handwriting. My daughter wouldn't do that. If you knew her, you would know she would never. But it all started with that house. So I get to digging. I look at the house's history, but I also look at the history of those who left, who ran away like my daughter did. Sure enough, the same patterns keep emerging. Mental psychosis, sudden depression, sudden illness, physical and psychological deterioration. 6 of them ended up taking their own lives. 6. 4 others succumbed in other ways. A pit formed in my stomach. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was so much worse than I had imagined. That's what it does. That's what it did to all of them. It tricks you, it torments you, it imprints itself upon you, it breaks your walls down, and then it takes. It takes your health, it takes your sanity, it takes your joy, it takes whatever it wants, whatever you value, until you are sucked dry, withered, unrecognizable to the people you love. Then you belong to it. Then it can use what remains of you to torment the next person. What is he? A demon. That's the go-to, I suppose. I don't think it works like that. You want to label it, you want to put it in a box, you want to learn the rules, but you can't. No one can. There are no rules. If there were rules, we wouldn't be able to understand them anyway. But if you want to know what I I'll tell you. I think it is evil. I think it feeds on misery and pain. I think it's a parasite. It dripped into our world the moment that lady had an aneurysm in the basement. It grew like a mold in that very spot with every subsequent tragedy, until it was strong enough to inflict tragedy, to infect tragedy and feed on it. Once it got Letterier to kill for it, it fully crossed the threshold. Letterier is the form it likes to use the most, the one it's most proud of. The concept of this evil thing having a sense of pride in its work made me shudder. I didn't want to believe this explanation. David concluded his story. I bought the house to starve it, but apparently it found a way, because it doesn't play by our rules. The only thing I know for sure is that it takes. Sometimes it takes for weeks. Sometimes it takes for decades. Sometimes it has a different plan for you entirely, but it will take. It will take. Those words rung through my mind again and again, long after our conversation ended. They stuck in my head while I vigorously shoveled a path down the driveway. They stuck in my head while I tried desperately to get my car in drivable condition. They stuck in my head as I drove down the long, dark country road, headed for the address David gave me. Trying to understand how the basement switch never failed to give me a headache, but I couldn't help think about it all. I had wished there was a logical explanation, but David was right. It doesn't play by our rules. It is beyond our understanding. People stopped coming to it, so it had to come to them. So it just did. Why move the whole room? Maybe it asked the room. We know nothing of its form. Maybe every time I walked into that basement, I was walking into its mouth. Why us? Does it matter? Was it random? There had to be a reason the rooms looked so similar. Maybe that's the key. Maybe it could only move to a room that was similar enough, but there I am trying to put rules on it again. No, I think it chose our basement because it knew it would drive me crazy. A completely different room. That's easy. Leave, call scientists, become famous for having the house that broke the laws of space and time. But a room that's just a little bit different. A little bit off, in ways only I would notice. How could I not obsess? This thing, demon, parasite, whatever it may be. It's smart. It's been playing me from the beginning. It probably still is. David agreed to meet me at the house, to give me whatever it was I needed to get inside. I was glad to have him on my side, even if I forced his hand with my threats. I made it past the long stretch of emptiness, and my car struggled not to get stuck in the snow or swerve off the road. I found my way into the small town of Coldwell. I took a left, then a right, and then I found myself on a long street, far away from the shops. Long driveways with mailboxes were spread out generously along the street. The numbers on those mailboxes ticked down as I passed them. 4B12, 410, 48. I was almost there. My steely determination began to break. My anxiety was rising. I saw the house slowly come into view with a large green Jeep parked a ways out in front. David stuck to his word, though I could tell he was keeping his distance even now. I parked alongside him and got out, making sure to grab my spare flashlight. I saw a man step out of the Jeep at the same time. His voice fit him well. The impression I had of him in my head was almost completely correct. Salt and pepper hair just a dash longer than a military cut, a square jaw, and a scowl that looked like his default mode. Then I finally got a look at the house. I don't know what I expected. Of course it wasn't going to look like a haunted house, but still it was smaller than I thought it would be. It didn't tower over me. It didn't have some grand, foreboding presence. It was just a house, quaint 2 stories, still bigger than mine, but absolutely nothing special. The only significant things about it were the barbed wire fence and the numerous signs warning against trespassers. No doubt David's doing. Adam. David greeted coldly. David. I responded in kind. I don't suppose I can talk you out of this. David assumed, correctly, no. Even after everything I told you. What would you do, man? If you had a chance to get your daughter out of there? It felt dirty invoking his deceased daughter, but I knew he had to understand. David paused for a moment, then shook his head and reached into his jacket pocket. He held up 3 keys and pointed to one of them, gate. Then he pointed to the second, front door. Finally to the third, basement. I took them from him, puzzled at the simplicity of it. That's it. So I can't break the locks, but I can unlock the locks. That's not a problem. It's not about the lock. It's about the belief in what a lock is. David responded cryptically. I wanted to hurry up and get inside, but I couldn't let that statement hang. What does that mean? This thing. It's not physical. A hunk of metal doesn't matter to it. The physical doesn't matter. I told you it takes from us our joy and our love. These aren't real things. These are concepts, abstracts, symbols, ideas. That's what this thing deals in. So I use locks for the same reason I keep a grandfather clock in the hallway. The locks contain it to the house. The clock contains it to time. That was a lot to absorb even after all this, so far beyond me. This man had clearly been in the weeds for a long time. How many things had he tried and failed? How much research had he done? Well, the lock didn't seem to work since it invaded my house. I countered. But it did work. It's bound to the basement. It never moved. It was never really in your house. It just sent you a window, and you were the ones who stepped through it. Every time you stepped foot in that basement, you were here. What makes you so sure? David chuckled with legitimate amusement and threw up his hands. Nothing. I haven't been sure of a single thing since what happened to Haley. Look at me, I'm no scientist. I don't know anything. I've just been dealing with this shit for too damn long. David let out one more sigh and the smile drained from his face. Good luck. Adam, I hope you find some peace. Make sure you lock those doors as soon as you enter and as soon as you exit. Do not leave them unlocked, and do not break the locks. He offered me a handshake and I accepted it. The look in his eyes was one of resignation. I could see that he thought he was sending me to my death. Maybe he was right. I walked up the long dirt path to the rusty, battered chain link gate and inserted the first key into the padlock. The rickety gate gave way, and I quickly shut it behind me, being sure to lock it back up. I made my way up the cracked stone path onto the porch, staring down the unassuming front door. Just an ordinary, wooden, white door, and yet it was the door to hell. The point of no return. I abandon all hope, you who enter here. I took a deep breath and plunged key 2 into the lock, turning until I heard a click. It was time. Time to do what you have to do. Time to be a dad. The inside of the house was as immediately unassuming as the outside. Aged but not decayed. Dusty but not filthy. It looked like any old house from the 90s. It was just cold and empty. It lacked the personality of a house that was lived in. It was devoid of quirks, devoid of color, devoid of life. I tried for a light switch but got no luck. It makes sense that David didn't care to pay the electric bill, but now I had to navigate this place in the dark. Only minimal blue light shone in through the windows, but not enough to illuminate the dark corners. I immediately readied my flashlight. I immediately noticed that I could still see my breath. No heat either. As I stepped further inside, I noticed one more thing. Tick. Tock. I turned a corner towards the noise, and I saw it sitting at the end of a hallway. The impossible grandfather clock. The noise I'd been hearing this whole time. Did it really have such a purpose as David claimed? I suppose time can get away from you when you're not keeping track of it. But when you're forced to hear every tick, you have to exist in those moments. The rhythm like a rail to keep you grounded and moving in the right direction. Maybe I was losing my mind. The house didn't help. The quiet was deafening, making the clock and my thoughts only seem louder. I thought I liked quiet, but I didn't like this quiet. It was unnatural. It was purposeful. Every dark corner made me anxious. Sure, that was unavoidable given everything I've experienced and learned, but this felt different. This wasn't anxiety about what could be in those shadows. This was anxiety about what IKNW was in those shadows. I couldn't see them. Even when I shined my flashlight into the corners, I saw nothing, but I knew they were there. The husks. Those poor souls who were hollowed out by this thing then puppeted around to do its bidding. I felt their eyes on me. By extension, I felt its eyes on me. The first door I tried led to a bathroom. The mirror was shattered and stained in blood, just like mine. Can't have been the original mirror, the one that carved up Letterier's face all those years ago. Did it do this to scare me? Did it already know I was coming? I heard a sloshing noise inside. I turned my flashlight towards it and it nearly flew from my hands. The light shone through the shower curtain, illuminating a silhouette sitting in the bathtub. I saw the shadow of an arm raise into view and reach for the edge of the curtain to peel it back. As it began to pull, I could see the deep red hue of the liquid in the tub. I stuttered back out of the room and shut the door firmly. It took everything in me not to scream. The next door I tried led to an empty bedroom. At least it looked empty when it was this dark. I didn't want to shine my flashlight inside. There was no point. I needed to find the basement. I tried to close the door, but it refused to close. I pulled hard, but it was as if there was someone on the other side pulling just as hard. As I stared into the dark room, a figure began to make itself visible. It was moving, agonizingly slow from the back of the room towards me, not walking, just moving. The first thing I saw was a white gown, then the pale gray skin, then the long black hair. I looked down and saw that her feet weren't touching the ground. I was petrified. My heart pounded out of my chest. The door wouldn't close. Eventually, I just let go and ran. When I looked back, it didn't appear to be following me. From around the corner, I heard the door creak and close on its own. I took a second to regroup and let my heart rate come back down. I realized I was being stupid. I didn't need to try doors to find the right one. I knew exactly what the door I was looking for looked like. I heard the pitter-patter of small footsteps in the other room. I wanted to find the door, but it could be Sammy. I had to follow them. Sammy. I whispered as I reached the source of the footsteps. Then I heard the pitter-patter behind me. Sam. I whispered again. Is it you, Sam? I knew in my gut it probably wasn't. It was probably the child, the husk of Caleb Letterier being puppeted around trying to fool me. But I still had to know for sure. More footsteps led me into the kitchen, but I saw no one. I was clearly being toyed with. It was puppeting me even without the strings. I was ready to go back to the doors, but then another pitter-patter startled me. It startled me because it was above me. Not muffled enough to be on the second floor. No, it was on the ceiling. Right above my head, I couldn't look. I really didn't want to see it, but I felt it looming over me. I took a few steps back and I heard the ceiling shuffle above me. Every step I took, I heard it crawl to match my position. Daddy. The thing above me called out. My entire body tensed. I couldn't meet a look. It was daring me. Daddy. It repeated, sounding more hollow. Suddenly, I felt a heavy drip on my face, landing on my forehead and cascading down. I couldn't help it. It was instinct. I looked. The child was sprawled out above me, its body facing down towards me, but its limbs twisted backwards to cling to the ceiling like an insect. Its face. It didn't have a face. Just a mangled, bloody, gaping chasm. The work of his father. I didn't have time to scream before it lunged down from the ceiling and crashed on top of me. I dropped to the ground, feeling its 40 or so pound frame land on my head. For a moment, I was staring directly into the chasm of its face, and it went deeper than I knew possible. And then it was gone. The weight lifted, and I laid there with the last of my sanity just about gone for good. I slowly made my way back to my feet, and all I could do was get back to it. Only a few more scans of the doors, and I finally found the door to the basement. It was the same door that we had for a time, only this one was locked. I carefully produced the final key. There was probably no use in being quiet. I knew that it knew I was here, but I was quiet anyway. Maybe just as some base survival instinct. I slid the key carefully into the lock. I began to turn it, but then I felt a strange and deeply unwelcome sensation. Breath on the back of my neck. My body went stiff and all the hair on my body stood on end. A shape began to form in my peripheral vision. A face, creeping slowly from behind me to the left side of me, inches from my face. If I turned my eyes to the left, I would look right into it. I didn't want to. It stood there, breathing. I could hear it. I could feel the warmth on my ear. I wanted to recoil at the discomfort, but I remained stiff as a board, my hand still clasped around the key in the lock. I didn't know why I thought it would help to stay still. I didn't know why I thought it would help not to look. But I did. The house always wins. It spoke into my ear. I couldn't help but recoil. Shivers involuntarily shot through me. It was too close. I turned my head, and there he was, right in front of me. The man I now know as Bill Letterier. The sharp man, with his sadistic grin and gaping, bleeding gash in his head. His breath smelled like dead water. Seeing his face in a mirror was one thing. Seeing it now inches from me was a million times worse. My heart jumped into my throat. I never wanted to see that face again. Never, especially never this close. He felt so much more real now. I screamed and fell back to the floor violently. But as soon as I did, he disappeared. Why did he disappear? Did this thing just want to scare me again? Unfortunately, I got my answer as soon as I asked it. I didn't let go of the key as I fell. In fact, I was gripping it very tightly. I felt the pain in my fingers, and then I looked down. I now only held the head of the key. The rest of it remained lodged in the lock. Realizing the situation, I jumped back to my feet and tried to pry the teeth of the key out of the lock with my fingers. I tried to turn it, but it was no use. It was stuck. The door would not be opened. Not 10 seconds later, I heard their voices coming from the other side of the door. Shouted Sammy. "Dad!" Shouted Maddie. "Help, Daddy!" "Please help us." They called out to me over and over, desperately. "Sammy." "I've got you," I yelled back before reassessing the situation. I had to get to them. I had to. And I knew in that very moment that I was playing right into its hands. I knew what I was about to do was EXCTLY what it wanted me to do. EXCTLY what I was told over and over again not to do. But I had no choice. It won. I stepped back and booted the door near the handle. It didn't budge much. I kicked it again, not much better. On the third kick, I heard wood begin to snap and I saw an indentation. 2 more kicks and the frame began to bust. Then I took another step back and ran at the door with my shoulder. It gave way. I did it. I broke one of the locks. I ran past the pieces of door, down the steps and into that old familiar basement. Into that pitch black darkness. The only light being the dull beam of my flashlight. It was different down here. It wasn't as quiet or as dead as it was before. The air felt different. Heavier, more humid. There was a persistent droning noise. Some kind of hollow hum that reverberated through the walls and the floor. Everything I shined my flashlight on glistened just a little bit more than it should, but it wasn't wet. It wasn't quite damp either. Everything was just clammy. I knew I had to get out of here as quickly as possible. "Sam Madison." I called out again. I shone my flashlight around the room. It looked empty until I looked in the dark corners. Sammy. He was standing in the back left corner, facing the walls. I almost didn't see him. I turned to the right and Maddie was standing similarly in the opposite corner. Both unmoving. "'Cause it's me." "It's Dad. Come on now, we have to go." I reached out to them, but I had a feeling they couldn't hear me. The low hum I was hearing began to change. Through the droning, I heard the voices again, all of them, saying their final words. But it wasn't chaotic like before. It was organized. It was almost rhythmic. Their words formed some kind of chant, melding and molding the phrases into some other kind of language. "Sammy, come on." I walked towards my son and placed a hand on his shoulder. He still didn't move. He was cold. I turned him to face me and his eyes were closed. His body was limp. His head swiveled as I tried to shake him awake. It felt like he wasn't even standing under his own power. "Sam, Shem," I shouted, trying to break through whatever was happening to him. "You chose him." Maddie's voice let out in a whisper from across the room. The chanting quieted as she spoke. "What?" I asked. "But you always do." "Don't you?" "What are you talking about?" I asked shakily. I pointed the flashlight towards her, and she remained in the corner, never moving an inch. I couldn't even tell if her mouth moved when she talked. "You're a failure. You were always a failure as a husband and as a father." She muttered, "Maddie, we have to go." "Come on, please." "We do have to go." But I was waiting for so long, and it finally happened. Mom came to pick us up. Sammy exclaimed, "Emmy and Sammy are going to be with Mom now. As we should be. You were never meant to be a father, Dar." "Mom isn't here, Maddie. Please, it's a trick. Stop talking like this. It's not you." I pleaded. It is me. But you don't know me, do you? You don't know anything about me. You just use me. You use me to be your housewife because your other housewife left. You don't care how much I hurt. That's not true, I shouted. You saw though, didn't you? I know you saw the scars on my arms. But you pretended you didn't because you want to keep believing everything was fine. You can't handle when things get tough. You can't handle being a parent. You never should have had us. But it's okay now, Dad. Mom's coming to get us. She'll take care of us. You can have your stress-free life. Tears began to stream down my face. I knew it wasn't really her talking, but I knew she was right about so much. I did see her scars. Deep down, maybe this is how she really felt. If she really had the chance to go be with her mother, maybe she would. Maybe she would have it better over there. But that's not what this is. This thing was taking from them, and I knew it wouldn't stop. If I get them out of the house, it wouldn't matter. They would continue to be fed upon until they were nothing. Is that what I was? How much had I taken from Maddie all these years? I took her childhood. I took her happiness. I took her dreams. Was I her monster? It didn't matter anymore. I just had to fix this. This had to end, and it did. I don't remember what happened next. All I remember was driving down a long, lonely road with my daughter in the passenger seat and my son asleep in the back. The sun rose in front of us. We were making our way back home. I may not remember what I did, but I know what I did. I did what I had to do. Where were we? Maddie asked. What happened to us? I don't. I fixed it. You're safe now. We're all safe, I said with as much of a smile as I could muster. What do you mean? How? She probably loved you, I responded, cutting her off. It felt good. I should have said it so much more. Maddie exclaimed with exaggerated disgust. Stop. A few moments passed, and then she spoke up again. Love you too. After a few days, I figured out what it was going to take from me. How smart and insidious it was. Why would it even let me make a bargain like that? It started to make sense. Little things started to go first. I'd misplace things. I'd reach into my mind to recall something, and I would find only fog. That's why I began writing almost right away. Our memories are the most precious things that any of us have, and I don't want mine to die with me. I am afraid. More afraid than I have ever been. Afraid for the day when I forget more. Afraid for the day when I forget them. Afraid for the day when I'll have to leave them. Until then, I'll hold my memories close. As close as I can for as long as I can. I'll read this book over and over. I will fight to give them everything I have left. I will love them until my last breath. I will remember. That's what you do when you're a parent. As for why it accepted my bargain, why it chose to take what it did from me, it's obvious. The first thing I forgot was to lock the door on my way out. I know what death is. It's not just when your consciousness leaves this earth. Death is so much more. Death is every unsaid thing that can now never be said. Death is every memory remembered for the last time. Death is every little thing you see that reminds you of the person who is supposed to be there, but isn't. My dad died 1,000 times, and I have died 1,000 times. I wish I got to tell you how wrong you were. I wish I got to tell you so many things. There always seemed to be something else in the way. You were never my monster. You were never my burden. I never resented you. I never would have left you. You were my dad. That's all. And you were enough. You always wanted to do the impossible. I think that's what every good parent wants. To win the no-win scenario. To be perfect and to make our lives perfect. But whether you succeeded or not never mattered. All that mattered to me was that you tried. And you did, always. The doctors said the acceleration of his cognitive decline was vicious. They gave him a generous 3 years before he wouldn't be able to remember anything or anyone. It took 8 years before he forgot my name, and even still, he said he loved me every time he saw me. He fought for us until the end. The last thing I said to him was that me and Sammy were going to be okay. He didn't know us by then, but I still saw his lip curl into a smile. I wasn't there when he passed. I got the call at Forum that he was gone. I had said so many final goodbyes, unsure which would be the last, but I still wish I got to be there to say it properly. No one was around to hear if he had any last words, but I know what they were. One of the few possessions he had to his name was an old CRT. I thought about donating it at first, but something inside me told me to keep it. It sat in my closet after that, but after the first time I read my dad's book, I dug it back out. I sat it on the floor and plugged it in. I turned it on and sat cross-legged in front of it, just watching and listening to the static. I waited and waited. None of the voices came through as did before, except one. I remember.